Welcome to Fantasy Audiobook, Mythical Card Master. Start with the Knight. Chapter 21. How is it possible? How could your strength grow so fast? Andy was shocked and howled in pain. Why is fate so unfair, giving people like you geniuses? Why? The troll's eyes were crazy, and he punched Chu Ming under him with both fists. With his left hand resisting the troll's attack, Chu Ming pulled out the black snake sword with his right hand. Since fate is so unfair, then I will send you into reincarnation. Puff. The long sword passed through the messy fist shadow and inserted into Andy's heart accurately. Ahem. The troll looked at his chest in disbelief, and raised his giant claw in a panic to grab Chu Ming. Chu Ming kicked the troll's huge body away, the sword left his heart, and a large amount of black blood spurted out. I pray that you will have a good pregnancy in the next life. Chu Ming clenched the hilt of the sword with both hands, turned around and twisted, the sword light flashed across, the troll's body hit the ground, and its head rolled out. Taking a few deep breaths, he wiped the black blood off the sword and walked towards Lawrence. Outside the battlefield, the old man sat in a wheelchair and looked at Andy's body quietly. After a while, he slowly said, "It's not that Andy has no talent, it's just that he didn't focus on cultivation. He only focused on practicing. Thinking of taking shortcuts. If he had any of your efforts, he would be a great knight by now." Chu Ming shrugged and said, "I don't care about his affairs." "You kid." Lawrence shook his head. The black crow on his shoulder suddenly spoke at this moment. "Maybe you should go." After hearing the words, everyone looked up and looked into the distance. A burst of noise came from the distance, as if someone heard the noise and rushed over. Chu Ming frowned and asked, "The academy is in the center of the capital, how do we get out?" "Ha ha, it's a small thing." Black Crow laughed triumphantly, "Come here a little bit." Chu Ming and Jai Hai looked at each other. Although they didn't know what the Black Crow wanted to do, they still did it. When the three of them were ready, wisps of darkness suddenly floated out from the Black Crow, wrapping them together. The darkness became thicker and thicker, and the library disappeared from sight. The next second, Chu Ming only felt a spin, and his body floated out of thin air in the darkness, heading towards an unknown place in the endless dark vortex. On the outskirts of the royal capital, outside the deserted village. The darkness gradually dissipated, and Chu Ming's vision gradually became clearer, and he could clearly see the barren fields under his feet. What an amazing ability! Chu Ming looked at the black crow on the old man's shoulder in surprise. Lawrence sneered. "I have never seen the world. This is the strange blood ability of magical creatures." "Kiki, yes, I am the only magical creature in this world." Black Crow laughed triumphantly, puffing out his chest. "Okay, stop being such a slut and go back quickly." Lawrence slapped the Black Crow away. "By the way, say hello to Monroe for me. I may not come back after I leave." I know, I really work hard." The Black Crow let out a mournful cry and turned into black light, which became smaller and smaller until it disappeared. After the noisy Black Crow left, Chu Ming expressed his doubts. "Didn't Andy say that Dean Monroe broke your leg? Why does your relationship seem good?" Lawrence was silent for a moment, pushed the wheelchair, and replied as he walked, "Back then, I was too young and energetic. Because of my so-called arrogance, I refused to yield to the royal family and accept the darkness, and I was almost eaten by the trolls. Later, Monroe proposed a duel with me in order to save my life. Ever since he became a troll, his strength has far surpassed mine. I was no match for him. I was directly defeated in the duel and had my legs broken. Although I knew he was trying to save me, I was still full of hatred for him at the time. However, now that so many years have passed and I have experienced the ups and downs of life, I have long since let go. If he hadn't secretly protected me in the academy, I would have been devoured by those hungry monsters long ago. Even so, with the surveillance of the nobles of the royal capital, all I can get is to stay alive." After speaking, Lawrence pushed the wheelchair over the dry grass stalks and fell into silence again. Chu Ming glanced at him and asked, "Where should we go next?" Lawrence took out a map and pointed to the northwest of the Rodan Kingdom, where the old national line of the Rodan Kingdom meets other countries, called the Land of Death. Historically, more than a dozen large-scale wars between countries have broken out here, determining the rise and fall of one country after another. Nowadays, it is a paradise for adventurers. A large number of wandering knights are mixed here, and it has become a black zone of the kingdom. The land of death has what I need, and it's also convenient for us to avoid the trolls. Without hesitation, Chu Ming nodded and helped Lawrence onto the black horse. In fact, it doesn't matter where he goes, as long as he can have a place to practice quietly. This time he went to the land of death and was personally taught by Lawrence. He believed that he would soon be able to reach the level of a great knight. A great knight under the age of 20, he's quite awesome when you think about it. After all, Lawrence, once known as the new star of the kingdom, only reached the level of Grand Knight when he was 27 years old. Before setting off, Chu Ming looked back at the royal capital that was vaguely visible behind him, surrounded by thick fog. He believed that this departure was only temporary and that one day he would return to this place. Just to kill the demons and clear everything. Chu Ming tightened the reins, the horses neighed, and the two horses galloped towards the northwest. In reality, Chu Ming quit writing, had a meal, returned to the table and turned on the computer. I remember that in the history of other worlds, many treasures were lost due to war in the land of death. Chu Ming bit his lip tightly and tapped his hands on the keyboard. As the knight's card strength increases, the gray-quality black snake sword can no longer fully meet his combat needs. He now urgently needs to change to a more handy weapon. After all, what can affect the battle is not only his own strength, but also the sword in his hand. If you want to solve the problem of weapons, you still have to rely on the power of technology. That is to say, in the real-world history compiled by the Card Master Alliance, find out the weapons with names and detailed lost locations in the land of death, and then find them through the influence of the history books on luck. This was easy to say, but much more difficult to implement than he imagined. First of all, it is relatively difficult to search for historical information. The officially compiled history of other worlds is actually summarized from the mouths of individual card characters. The answers he wanted, such as what kind of treasures were lost, could not be found in the official history books of other worlds. He could only try his luck by listening to the original audio recordings of the card characters. Secondly, even if he does find it, the weapon may not still be useful or suitable for him. But this is not a problem for Chu Ming. In order to defeat Lyle, he survived for 3 days and 3 nights. This is nothing. Chu Ming's eyes were serious. He put on his headphones, and took the trouble to search for available information on the internet over and over again. However, his luck seemed to be pretty good. In less than half a day, a crimson long sword with an animal head sword appeared in front of him. Hunter's sword. Quality: dark green. Skill: hunting frenzy. Hunting frenzy: the user can absorb the blood mist after killing the prey, temporarily improving various physical qualities, up to twice the limit, and the blood mist overflowing will be used to restore physical strength. Chu Ming used the mouse to enlarge the picture of the hunter's sword and take a closer look. The more he looked at it, the more he liked it. This long sword is obviously an artifact of war. The more enemies it kills, the stronger it becomes, and it can also restore stamina. Doesn't this clearly tell him not to be afraid of being beaten by a group? Love it, love it. Let's not talk about the entire kingdom of Rodan, but let's talk about the capital of Rodan. The number of trolls and crazy knights is ridiculously large. When manpower is exhausted, the legend of 1 against 10,000 has long since disappeared with the disappearance of extraordinary power. Even if the trolls in the royal capital lined up to chop their heads off for him, he probably wouldn't be able to kill them all in 3 days and 3 nights. His original plan was to break through the layers of troll siege, find the source of pollution that plunged mankind into darkness in the capital, and find a way to solve it. As for why he was sure that the source of the pollution was in the royal capital, based on his long-term observation, he found that the trolls in the royal capital were much stronger than other places, and their numbers were also astonishingly large. There must be something that is constantly attracting trolls to gather in the royal capital. Even if this thing is not the source of pollution as he imagined, it is the thing closest to the truth. However, it is extremely difficult to break through the troll defense line in the capital in full public view. With the help of the hunter's sword, this process will be much easier. Then the next goal is clear. First, stay in the land of death for a while, improve your strength to that of a great knight, and find the hunter's sword. With the help of history books, these 2 things are not difficult to do. The only problem now is that at the end of the Dark Age, the Great Knight is already the pinnacle of human extraordinary power, and the top troll is far more powerful than this. If you can't find the path after the Great Knight, then trying to defeat the troll and correct history is simply a fantasy. Chu Ming leaned back in the chair and rubbed his temples with a headache. I finally know why those card characters always have faces full of melancholy and despair when the reason for the destruction of the world is mentioned. The water in this alien world is too deep, even I can't grasp it. Oh, it would be great if I could find an extraordinary path that rivals the power of the troll. After finishing his words, Chu Ming paused and suddenly thought of something. If I can't beat them, why don't I join them? Fight the trolls with troll power. Chu Ming slapped his head suddenly. Although how to resist the erosion of darkness is still a problem, this is still an idea. But this thing is too difficult to implement. It's best to ask Lawrence first. This old man has lived for so many years and has become a human spirit. Maybe he can do something about it. As soon as he thought of it, Chu Ming immediately took the history book floating aside in his hands. He glanced at the content above, then picked up the quill and wrote on it. In Dark Age 8417, Andrew discovered the hunter's sword that had been lost for nearly 100 years in a cave on the cliff of the Snow Ridge in the Land of Death. After watching the giant eagle of the Snow Ridge soar in the sky, he suddenly had an idea and understood the secret of the griffin. The pen falls and the golden light appears. The font only jiggled slightly before being fixed on the book. It's done. Now we just need to wait for the history book to be automatically copied to 3 years later. Although he couldn't enter the writing state, Chu Ming didn't take any time off. School will start in a few days, and before he can get certified as a card teacher, Teacher Wu Qingfeng has called him many times to urge him. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Chu Ming took a trip and went to the Card Master Alliance building in the city center for certification. The authentication process is very simple. You only need to provide the corresponding card information and verify the suitability of the card to pass directly. The whole process does not take more than 10 minutes. The card he provided this time to authenticate the identity of the card master was Zhe Hai's card. Attendant Knight Zhe Hai. Quality: Dark Gray. Race: Human race. Skills: Life Strengthening Intermediate, Sword Mastery Intermediate. After a long period of training, Zhe Hai's swordsmanship has reached the intermediate level, but with his talent, it is almost impossible to go further. Without being contaminated by darkness, the upper limit of his strength has been firmly fixed at dark gray. And this is exactly what Chu Ming wants. As a card to cover up Andrew, the fewer changes, the less likely it is to attract others' attention. After the authentication, Chu Ming did not stay outside anymore, but prepared to go back directly. Although the process of certified card master is fast, it still takes a lot of time for him to travel to and from the city center. In just one afternoon, the copying in the history books was coming to an end, and he couldn't wait to get back home and get into writing mode. At the entrance of the Card Master Alliance building, Chu Ming waved to the roadside and hailed a taxi. "Master, are you going to Ziwan Community?" As soon as the driver rolled down the window, he hesitated when he heard that Chu Ming wanted to go back to Ziwan Community. "Little brother, it seems that there was a dark creature attacking there a few days ago." Chu Ming smiled and said, "Brother, don't worry, the invading monster has been dealt with, and I am a card master. If something happens, I will protect you." "Is this so?" The driver breathed a sigh of relief and greeted Chu Ming into the car. "Don't blame me, brother. I'm careful. I'm just an ordinary person. I am older and younger. If something happens, it will be difficult for the whole family." "I understand." The car started, and the two started chatting. The driver drove the car and reminded without looking back, "Little brother, you have to be careful lately." Chu Ming was distracted and asked, "What happened recently?" The driver brother thought about it for a moment and his tone became arrogant. "I heard from the brothers in the driver group that in places attacked by dark creatures, the people nearby were cursed. Yesterday, an unlucky man was attacked a second time, and it was still broad daylight." "Is that so?" Chu Ming pondered for a while, smiled and comforted, "Thank you, brother, I will pay attention." 20 minutes later, Chu Ming got off the car, said goodbye to the driver and returned home. These trolls are getting more and more aggressive. Chu Ming's face gradually became serious. The problem now is that the Dark Research Institute has not discovered that trolls are hiding among humans, and I don't have any evidence. It seems we have to speed up the progress of history. Thinking of this, Chu Ming took out the history book and his vision began to shake. The real world peeled off like old wallpaper, and the surrounding environment changed drastically. He held his head and raised his hand to see that his clothes had changed into a knight's uniform. Is this a cave? Just when he was about to carefully observe his surroundings, a wave of memories flooded into his mind. In the memory, the three of them evaded the pursuit of the crazy knight while rushing, and spent 3 months entering the place of death where fish and dragons were mixed. Afterwards, while practicing, he and Lawrence traveled throughout the land of death. In the past 3 years, his biggest gain was not in personal strength, but in experience. In the land of death, he could see all kinds of people with different personalities. Some were desperate for survival, while others enjoyed killing. Of course, Chu Ming would not be polite to these scumbags who dehumanize themselves. He would kill everyone he saw and would not show any mercy. With his near dark green strength, as long as he doesn't encounter a big knight, he can basically walk sideways in the land of death. It is also because of Chu Ming's hatred of evil and his behavior of killing evil that many wanderers in the land of death are frightened and will run away just hearing rumors about him. The local herdsmen who were troubled by wanderers did not know Chu Ming's name, so they could only give him a good name as a hunting knight based on their superficial knowledge. Chu Ming chuckled. Hunting knight, not bad, I like it very much. Memories continued to pour in, and Chu Ming understood why he appeared in the cave. Half a year ago, Lawrence suddenly stopped traveling and took Chu Ming to find a homeless town to live in. After that, he returned to the same state as when he was in the academy, locking himself in the hut all day long, and sometimes even fainted from hunger because he was too involved. Lawrence spent all his efforts on the so-called secret healing medicine, and even couldn't find time to guide Chu Ming on the secret method. Fortunately, Chu Ming has fully understood Lawrence's secret skills in the past 2.5 years, and he is now only one opportunity away from becoming a great knight. Yesterday, Lawrence suddenly walked out of the hut and asked Chu Ming to go to the nearby snow ridge to help collect some herbs. Collecting herbs was just a trivial matter, so Chu Ming readily agreed. He was feeling a little depressed as he could not find an opportunity to break through the secret method. He just wanted to take advantage of this trip to enjoy the scenery of the snowy ridge and relax. Chu Ming then went to the Schweling mountain cliff to pick a herb that only grew on the cliff. Under the influence of historical records, while collecting herbs, he accidentally stepped on the air and fell into the cave. The memory was gradually absorbed, and Chu Ming's eyes became clear. It seems that this is where the great knight Snow Eagle is buried. According to the information in the oral recording of the Snow Eagle Knight officially recorded by the Card Master Alliance, he was defeated in a big battle and fled all the way to the snowy ridge. In the end, the enemy shot down the Snow Eagle at his feet and trapped him to death among the cliffs. In order to place his own bones, the knight Snow Eagle, with both of his legs broken, endured severe pain and opened a small cave between the cliffs. Chu Ming glanced around, and finally saw a huge Snow Eagle skeleton in the corner of the cave, and next to it, a much smaller-looking human skeleton was lying quietly. "Senior, I'm offended." Chu Ming clasped his hands together, prayed a few words, and then came to the skeleton of the Snow Eagle Knight. Scanning his eyes, he finally fixed his gaze on a dark slate next to the hand bones. Is this the hunter's sword? He carefully picked up the dark slate. Suddenly, the dark slate seemed to sense Chu Ming's presence, and red lines spread from it, wrapping around his arm. The stones on the dark slate were peeling off, revealing the hunter's sword with the beast's head and red blade. Feeling the heavy weight on his palm, Chu Ming nodded with satisfaction. Now that the sword is in hand, it's time to leave. He put the hunter's sword on his waist and walked towards the light. After a while, Chu Ming walked out of the cave. The cold wind blew by, and he shook his body comfortably. He looked up at the height of the cliff and began to think about how to get up. At this moment, a rapid cry of chicks sounded, and he discovered that there was a huge snow eagle nest under the cave. Seeing the impatient eagles opening their mouths to beg for food, Chu Ming paused in his heart, suddenly realized something, and looked up suddenly. Above the clear sky, the clear and ferocious sound of an eagle echoed across the snowy ridge. A huge snow eagle with snow-white feathers and sharp eyes flapped its wings in the wind, hovering high in the sky, overlooking the earth. In a daze, Chu Ming couldn't help but activate the secret technique. He seemed to see the king of the sky, the griffin, traveling in the sky accompanying the storm. Violent. Just when Chu Ming fell into a mysterious epiphany, the snow eagle flying in the sky saw him as an intruder. With sharp eyes, it lowered its head and dived towards Chu Ming. At this critical moment, the ice flag under Chu Ming's feet seemed to be pulled by the wind, and actually started to circle around him. The cold wind gathered and an invisible pressure rose. Chu Ming suddenly opened his eyes. Violent. An invisible weight surged towards Snow Eagle from all directions along with the strong wind. It howled and couldn't stabilize its flying posture and fell straight into the abyss of the white cliff. Above the nest, the young eagle screamed in panic, which brought Chu Ming's consciousness back to reality from his epiphany. He subconsciously relaxed the heavy pressure on Snow Eagle. The strong wind dissipated, and the Snow Eagle relaxed its wings, flapped its wings, and flew up again along with the flowing wind. The Snow Eagle circled in the air several times and landed in front of the cave. It lowered its body and quietly glanced at the hunter's sword on Chu Ming's waist, and let out a whimpering sound of aggrieveness. Chu Ming ignored it and focused on the history books. Hunting the Great Knight Andrew. Quality: dark green. Race: human race. Skills: King's Wind, Black Snake Sense, Life Enhancement Advanced, Sword Mastery Intermediate. Feeling the surging power in his body, he sighed, finally reached the level of a great knight. After observing his body for a while, he returned his attention to the Snow Eagle in front of him. This Snow Eagle can't be the descendant of the injured Snow Eagle back then. Chu Ming glanced at the long sword at his waist, and then looked up at the towering snow-covered cliffs. It seems like it has a memory of the hunter's sword. Maybe I can let it take me up there. After trying to communicate with Shui Ying for a while, Shui Ying seemed to understand what he meant as he kept pointing upwards. She squatted down and motioned for him to come up. Grasping the Snow Eagle's strong white feathers, Chu Ming steadily rode on its back. With the roar of an eagle, Snow Eagle spread its arms and jumped towards the cliff. The strong wind blew by. It stabilized its body, circled several times, continued to increase in height, and finally landed on the cliff. Stepping on the soft snow, Chu Ming patted Snow Eagle on the head. "You go back, I'm leaving." In fact, he was still very attracted to the Snow Eagle mount, but she was already the mother of 3 young eagles. If they just ran away like this, these young eagles would probably starve to death on the cliff. Pity. Chu Ming grabbed the herbs scattered on the ground and buried in the snow, and walked towards the snowy ridge. Following the way he came, Chu Ming descended the snow ridge easily. Passing through a small snow forest, looking into the distance, he saw a wandering town with smoke rising from the distance. It's winter, and the road is quiet, with only the howling of the cold wind being heard. Chu Ming walked on the black mud road and shuttled between dilapidated snow houses. Suddenly, an awkward feeling arose in Chu Ming's heart, and he stopped. Wrong. He glanced at the brightly lit wine house in front of him and frowned. This pub is usually the noisiest, why is it suddenly silent? Just when Chu Ming was about to enter the house to find out what was going on, Jai Hai, who was hiding in the corner, noticed that he was back and waved to him cautiously. Chu Ming paused when he pushed open the chai door and walked calmly in the direction of Jai Hai. "Jai Hai, what happened?" Jai Hai looked around nervously and whispered, "Master, it's not good. That group of wanderers secretly colluded with the knights from the royal capital and exposed the location of our hut. We'd better run quickly." Chu Ming looked calm and held the hilt of the hunter's sword. "Where is Lawrence now?" Jai Hai hesitated and said, "The old man is still in the hut, but I don't dare to go back. I have been waiting here for you. Let's go back." Chu Ming grabbed Jai Hai's arm, exerted the great knight's physical strength to the extreme, and hurried towards the hut. But, the cold wind poured into Jai Hai's mouth, his teeth chattered, and he could not speak. "No need to but, trust me." Chu Ming didn't look back, running through the snow like a snow leopard at an astonishing speed. After a while, a lonely hut standing in the white snow appeared in his field of vision, which was where Chu Ming had been living for the past 6 months. Sure enough, they're here. Looking at the gorgeously dressed knights outside the hut, Chu Ming put down Jai Hai and walked to the front of the knights. Sir Andrew, I finally see you. The leader of the night, a strong man with a beard, inserted his sword into the snow, guarded the sword with both hands and looked at him quietly. Chu Ming shouted softly, Todd, where is Lawrence now? Todd is the name of the bearded Han Knight. His identity is the leader of the Roden Royal Palace Guards Knights. After accepting the darkness, his strength has reached the level of a great knight. In the past few months, Todd has been leading the Palace Guard Knights to track their group, so Chu Ming also knows something about him. The man said solemnly, Mr. Lawrence is a senior knight that I respect. I will not hurt him, but you must follow me back to the royal capital. Chu Ming narrowed his eyes. What if I said no? Sorry, you have to go back with me. Todd raised the giant sword as heavy as a door panel and stared at Chu Ming sharply. Chu Ming's eyes were calm and he drew the hunter's sword. Todd, who are you fighting for? Is it myself, the royal family, or the darkness? Stop talking nonsense. Todd roared angrily, veins popped up all over his body, and countless black lines wrapped around his body. Like a violent bear, he swung his giant sword and rushed towards Chu Ming. Since the positions are different, there is nothing more to say. Chu Ming stood on the spot, holding the hunter's sword across his chest. Bang! The two swords intertwined, a huge shock wave exploded, the snowflakes were torn apart, and Chu Ming slid back a few meters. Great night, Todd grinned, seemingly more pleased than he was by the surprise. Andrew, Dean Monroe said that you are the most talented knight of this generation, and I believe it now. Chu Ming didn't say anything. The king's wind started, and the surrounding cold wind suddenly stopped. Invisible pressure and strong wind swept toward Todd. Todd snorted softly, his bones creaking, and he was as tall as a giant bear, unable to support himself and teetering on the verge of collapse. In order to interrupt Chu Ming's secret skill, Todd's body glowed with red light. He actually withstood the pressure and swung the giant sword in his hand into a windmill, forcibly dispelling the strong wind. At this time, Chu Ming held swords in both hands and stepped forward, swinging out the red blade. In an instant, the scorching red light melted the ice and snow, cutting through the armor as easily as cutting tofu, and blood splashed into the white snow. Ahem! Todd covered his neck and stood with his giant sword supporting his body. In a daze, he seemed to see Chu Ming walking in front of him, and then there were screams and the sound of red-hot irons burning flesh behind him. After a while, Chu Ming came back holding the increasingly red hunter's sword. Todd, you lose, you can't take anyone with you. Yeah, Todd was half kneeling on the ground, with a cheerful smile on his face. Anyway, I've had enough of living with a bunch of monsters. Thank you, Mr. Andrew. It's just, I'm sorry for my mother and teacher. I was too cowardly and chose to escape. I couldn't go back to see them after all. After speaking, Todd's huge body fell into the snow and lost his breath. Chu Ming looked at Todd's body and sighed. Jai, come help me and see if there is anything useful on them. I'll go see how Lawrence is doing. After giving the instructions, he put away the hunter's sword, turned around and returned to the house. In the hut, the fire pit was burning brightly, and Lawrence was curled up by the fire, as if asleep. Teacher Lawrence, are you okay? Chu Ming stepped forward and patted his shoulder gently. After a while, Lawrence slowly opened his cloudy eyes and looked at Chu Ming. You're back. The fire is so warm that I almost fell asleep. As long as it's okay. The old man hunched over his body and soon fell into a deep sleep again. In the past 3 years, for some unknown reason, Lawrence's body has become weaker and weaker, reaching the point where a gust of wind can blow him down. It had snowed heavily in the past few days, and his physical condition was so bad that he couldn't go out at all. If Todd wanted to do anything to the old man, he would soon be unable to handle it. Seeing that he was fine, Chu Ming breathed a sigh of relief. After going outside the house, he and Jai spent some time burying the bodies of the knights under the nearby soil. After a while, when the two of them returned to the wooden house despite the wind and snow, Chu Ming also had 2 more pieces of parchment in his hand. Secret technique of Violent Bear. Quality: dark green. Skill: Violent Behemoth. Chu Ming felt much better when he saw the card information appearing in the history book. Compared to the Griffin secret technique, the Violent Bear secret technique is more suitable for use on the real body. Even if it is not used, it should be able to sell a lot of Alliance coins on the black market. Putting away the secret method, he looked at another piece of parchment. Is this written by Dean Monroe? Looking at the signature above, Chu Ming's mind moved, and he patiently read all the contents on the parchment. After a while, he put down the parchment, his pupils shaking. Todd is actually a student of Monroe, and his secret technique of violent bears was also taught by Monroe, who is the great knight of violent bears. The reason why the man was ordered by the royal family to track Chu Ming and his party was because Monroe manipulated them. The purpose is to get Todd to hand over this parchment to Lawrence. The content on the parchment is very simple. It records a banquet that will be held in 2 months. The banquet list involves the famous troll nobles of the Rodent Kingdom and the Troll King behind them. Garvin Spears, King of Trolls. Chu Ming murmured, suddenly thinking of something, with a shocked expression on his face. Isn't this guy the core that card masters used in the real world to disturb the history of other worlds? After the disturbance failed, the history of the other world perished 3,000 years ahead of schedule, and the card Dawn Knight Jarvan Spears also turned into fly ash, announcing the failure of human intervention in the history of the other world. How did he become the King of Trolls? Chu Ming suddenly broke out in cold sweat. Did it turn out that the so-called trolls and crazy knights all appeared because of this man? The card masters are really doing bad things with good intentions now. Chu Ming read the contents on the parchment again and murmured, is the Troll King Jarvan Spears the source of all pollution? Of course not. Lawrence didn't know when he woke up. When he took the blood-stained parchment handed over by Chu Ming, he was stunned for a moment. I didn't expect that Monroe's students would be so cowardly. They would rather accept death than face the troll. The old man shook his head, sighed, turned his attention back to Chu Ming's question, and told Jiwen's story in a slightly hoarse voice. The Grand Knight of the Dawn, Jarvan Spears, was born in the Spears family, one of the 3 pioneering knight families. He reached the realm of Grand Knight at the age of only 40. He originally had a bright future, but he was attacked by dark creatures during one of his duties and escaped back to the royal capital with serious injuries. After that, he seemed to have changed into a different person. He was chattering. He often hid in his room and never came out. He would swear to everyone he saw. Dark creatures will eventually overwhelm the world. Chu Ming was silent for a moment. It seems that the card master's disturbance of history really worked, rewriting Jarvan's original fate of dying at the hands of dark creatures. However, the subsequent plot direction seems to be a little wrong. It feels like the wrong script. While Chu Ming was still thinking, the old man's voice continued to reach his ears. At that time, everyone thought he was crazy. In order to preserve the family's reputation, his father locked him in a dark room and did not allow him to interact with anyone. So, one night 3 years later, tragedy happened. Lawrence's voice began to grow deeper. A dark creature suddenly broke out of the dark room, slaughtered the entire Spears family, and spread the pollution. Go out. And this dark creature is Jarvan, who has transformed into a troll. As he spoke, Lawrence stretched out his right hand, and several clearly visible black lines were beating in his wrist. Chu Ming's eyes narrowed. Is this a characteristic only of crazy knights? Yes, this dark power exists in everyone. Jarvan Spears is not the source, but the first communicator who caused the dark power to explode. How can dark power exist in humans? Chu Ming subconsciously wanted to deny it. If dark power exists in humans from other worlds, then it will also exist in those card characters. In this case, it is impossible for the Dark Research Institute not to know about it. Lawrence shook his head and coughed a few times. With the bloodline shackles promised by the gods, it is naturally impossible for humans to have dark bloodline. But what if I told you that it is not humans who are polluted by darkness, but the bloodline shackles themselves? Quote question mark exclamation mark exclamation mark quote. The old man tremblingly took out an animal skin book from his arms and handed it to Chu Ming. Chu Ming smoothed the cover of the book and read the title clearly, The Seat of 7 Gods, Order and Kingship. Lawrence took the hot soup handed over by Zhehai and explained, the 7 gods are the 7 gods of creation, the first gods in the mythical era. They represent order, war, arms, fertility, wisdom, earth, and dark night. Among them, order controls all the rules and orders in the world. He represents order and royal power, and the bloodline shackles are exactly what he promised to mankind in order to maintain the stability of the human order. When the distant age of the gods was buried by time, the glory of the gods, power gradually dimmed, and darkness returned. The bloodline shackles that represent the divine power of order have become dim after a long period of time. Darkness took advantage of it and contaminated the divine power of order and the shackles on humans. This is also why trolls can switch between humans and dark forms, because what is contaminated is not the humans themselves, but the blood shackles. This is also why trolls like to pick knights as targets of pollution. Compared to other people, knights, as a link in the order, are more intimate with them. Chu Ming was stunned. Does this mean that as long as the shackles of blood can be broken, the troll can be eliminated? He could finally understand why Lawrence locked himself in the house all day. It took such a long and in-depth research to dig out this buried truth. If Lawrence hadn't told him, he didn't know how many weeks it would have taken for him to understand the truth. Lawrence replied, theoretically, the basis of the divine power of order is still order. If we can find the opposite divine power to cancel it, we may be able to break the shackles of blood. It's just a pity. The old man laughed at himself. I have been experiencing failures for the rest of my life, and I didn't expect this time to be no exception. In my original idea, there was a natural conflict between the divine power of order and the divine power of war. As long as we collect enough divine power left by the war in the world, we can use it to break the shackles of blood. But I overestimated myself. Lawrence instantly became ugly and spat out a mouthful of blood. When Chu Ming saw this, he quickly went up to help the old man. It is simply a dream to steal the power of gods with mortal power. The weak divine power collected over the years is simply not enough to compete with the shackles of blood. On the contrary, it made my body full of holes. Boy, isn't that funny? Chu Ming shook his head. It's just a pity that it failed to live up to Monroe's expectations. Lawrence lay in Chu Ming's arms for a while and relaxed. The old man put his hand into his clothes, took out the bottle of red potion that Chu Ming had seen before, and handed it to him. The original bottle has been used by me, but I failed. This is re-extracted. I hope you can make good use of it. Chu Ming took the magical secret medicine and inadvertently saw the blood stains remaining on it. He was lost in thought for a while, then lowered his head and asked the old man, "Did you use your own blood?" Lawrence chuckled weakly. "Andrew, nothing can be hidden from your eyes." Chu Ming squeezed the divine secret medicine in his hand, and then slowly released his hand. Chu Ming put away the magical secret medicine with a heavy heart. The troll king Jiwen is about to hold a grand banquet in the royal capital. All the nobles in the kingdom are invited to the banquet, including my father Harold. He doesn't know the situation in the royal capital. He's just afraid that he will be implicated by me this time. Life or death is unpredictable. I have to start rushing back during the banquet. It's too late. Lawrence shook his head, and based on the strength of your great knight, you are no match for Jiwen. You will only die if you go. Unless you can find a way to break the shackles of blood now, I'm not optimistic about it. Chu Ming remained silent, took off his iron finger gauntlet, and looked at his wrist. He discovered that ever since he learned about the darkening of the bloodline shackles, he had developed symptoms similar to those of Lawrence. As if knowing its existence can make people fall towards darkness. The firewood pile burned fiercely, illuminating half of Chu Ming's face. He asked, "Teacher Lawrence, if I voluntarily fall into the darkness, will it be able to weaken the power of order in the shackles of blood and allow the divine secret medicine to take effect?" He had thought carefully about becoming a troll. After reaching the level of power of the Great Knight, his path to extraordinary knighthood has come to an end. There is almost no hope of breaking through the limitations of the times and reaching a higher level. But if he uses the power of the troll, he can easily break through the Great Knight and reach a new level of power. This also allows Andrew's cards to jump from dark green quality to blue quality. In the past, he was not sure of controlling this dark force, but now that he has the magical secret medicine, he may be able to control this dark force with the help of the secret medicine. Lawrence, who was lying beside him, fell silent after hearing Chu Ming's bold idea. "I don't know, but I don't recommend you try it. Once you accept the darkness, it will be difficult to look back." Chu Ming shook his head and smiled. "How will you know if you don't try? If I fail, please take out my blood and leave it to the next night." With time and history, it is not that he cannot accept failure. On the contrary, He hated the feeling of not being able to protect his family and friends even more, and it would be difficult to accept it even if it happened again a few times. He didn't want the tragedy that happened in Black Snake Town to happen again in the capital. To him, these people are living beings. Master, why don't you let me try it? Jai gritted his teeth and stood up. Chu Ming shook his head. Jai, you better stop being so aggressive. I know you are afraid of death. Stay inside and wait for news from me. With that said, he walked out of the hut alone. The snow is getting heavier and heavier, and it's completely white outside. In order to prevent himself from losing control and injuring Lawrence and the two of them, he randomly found a direction, walked to a cedar, and sat up cross-legged. Come on, let me see what the power of darkness is like. Chu Ming closed his eyes and entered a meditative state. The whistling sound of the north wind gradually moved away from him, and he seemed to have entered a silent and dark world. He didn't know how much time had passed, but a golden light suddenly appeared on him in the dark world, and a warm feeling rose from his heart. But before Chu Ming could get close to the golden light, a deep darkness swam on the golden light, and a violent and terrifying aura came from above, making him feel like he had fallen into an ice cellar. Is this the dark power? Chu Ming took a deep breath and plunged directly into the darkness without hesitation. Under the cedar, Chu Ming frowned and his body changed. The muscles all over his body seemed to come alive, constantly squirming and expanding under the skin, and soon the skin burst and wrapped him up. Later, Chu Ming woke up from his meditation and suddenly opened his eyes full of rage. Roar! Powerful pressure came out of the body. The cedar on the side withstood the snow, but failed to withstand the pressure. There was a cracking sound and collapsed to the ground. He covered his head in pain, and with his remaining clear consciousness, he drank the red divine medicine in one gulp. Divine power surged in his body, penetrating through his internal organs and heading towards the shackles of blood that existed in the dark. When the impact hit, Chu Ming felt the blood in his body boiling, and heat radiated out, melting the ice and snow. Using the body as a battlefield, the divine power was raging wildly inside. The young man felt like he had been severely injured, spitting out black blood. Persist in. Chu Ming grabbed the ground with both hands and fell to his knees in pain. A pain that penetrated deep into his bones and soul lingered throughout his body, and he felt as if his body was being torn into powder. Well, I don't know how much time passed, but when the young man was numb to the pain, he suddenly heard a clicking sound from his body, and an unprecedented joy that came from the depths of his life welled up in his heart. Did you make it? Looking at the gradually fading muscles and dark lines on his arms, before he could breathe a sigh of relief, another force surged into his heart, and the pain returned again, and his face wrinkled up. Chu Ming realized something, slammed his hands on the ground, and roared, "Black Snake! Quiet!" Without the restraints of the bloodline shackles, the Black Snake bloodline that had always been quiet in Chu Ming's body suddenly burst out, swallowing up the remaining mutant power, and the darkness gained new support in his body. Darkness, order and the blood of the Black Snake were intertwined, and order once again established bloodline shackles on him. The feeling of being imprisoned came over him. Chu Ming's muscles grew wildly, and Black Snake scales covered his body like black armor. He could no longer bear the severe pain in his mind and passed out. Time passed, the heavy snow gradually stopped, and morning came. The golden morning light shone on Chu Ming, and he opened his eyes. He slowly sat up from the snow, his face turning ugly. I didn't expect that at the critical moment, I would be counterattacked by the Black Snake bloodline. Opening the history book to check his own information, Andrew's information showed new changes. Snake Demon Knight Andrew. Quality: Blue. Race: Dark Creature. Skills: King's Coercion, Devil's Muscle, Black Snake Sense, Sword Mastery Intermediate. He raised his arm, and rows of black scales grew out of the flesh, covering his body. Although I didn't succeed in breaking the blood shackles, with this power, I should have the capital to face the King of Trolls directly. After sitting there for a while, Chu Ming got up and walked towards the cabin. After walking for more than 10 minutes, he saw the hut in the distance and Jai standing at the door. Master. Seeing Chu Ming appear, Jai greeted him anxiously, "Are you okay?" "Don't worry, you won't die," Chu Ming replied, pushed open the wooden door and walked into the hut. In the house, the firewood was still burning brightly, and Lawrence curled up next to him, staying up all night. You're back. Chu Ming nodded, remained silent for a moment, and then said. I failed to break the shackles of blood. Tomorrow I will set off to the royal capital to prepare for a decisive battle with the Troll King Jiwen at the banquet. If I unfortunately die, Dean Monroe will take my blood and leave it to the next knight. Ahem, I got it. Lawrence coughed a few times and turned his head, but this time, I will go back with you. I want to go back and see the spring in the capital. Zhe poked his head in from outside. I want to go back too. I will go wherever the young master goes. Spring begins in Dark Age 8418. 2 months passed in a hurry. Chu Ming and the others crossed the vast land of ice and snow, and when spring came, they returned to the royal capital after 3 years. On the outskirts of the royal capital, Chu Ming dismounted and handed the reins to Zhe. He planned to enter the royal capital directly, and Lawrence and the others were going to join Black Crow here. Zhe said worriedly, Young master, be careful, Master Harold will leave it to me. Rest assured. Chu Ming patted him on the shoulder, bid farewell to the two of them and prepared to enter the royal capital. Halfway there, Lawrence's hoarse voice sounded from behind. Come back alive. Chu Ming waved his hand without looking back. In fact, he never thought about coming back alive. In just 2 months, the dark power made his character become a lot more violent. I don't know how much humanity he will have left in a few years. Once Jarvan dies, he will be the next Troll King. Then there will be no change in the ending of the alien world. The best ending is that he first kills all the trolls in Jarvan and Rodan Kingdom, and then kills himself. As long as humans can get some breathing space, they can be free to resist the increasingly terrifying dark creatures. Even if he is not around in the future, maybe people from other worlds will find their own way out and get rid of the control of bloodline shackles. Walking to the main road, Chu Ming blended into the passing caravans. Naturally, his plan to force his way into the capital this time was not to show off his strength, but to allow the hunter's sword to absorb enough blood mist before meeting the Troll King to achieve the conditions for activating the hunting fever skill. Only in this way can he be in his strongest state to face the strongest Dark King of this era. On the avenue, as caravans came and went, Chu Ming looked at the hidden monsters in the crowd and chuckled. Today is the day of the troll banquet. Countless troll nobles and crazy knights gather here. This is a carnival belonging to the monsters. Of course, it's also my carnival. Chu Ming whispered and drew the hunter's sword. The guard at the gate of the royal capital looked wary when he saw him taking out his weapon. Then he was stunned and recognized his identity. Andrew, let's take it easy. The 2 guards roared and ran towards him, turning into ugly monsters lying on all fours. A trace of bloodlust flashed in Chu Ming's eyes, and then, an afterimage of red light pierced the air. In the horrified eyes of everyone, the bodies of the 2 monster guards were broken into 2 pieces before they landed, and black blood spilled all over the ground. Everyone was so frightened by this scene that they froze in place. After several seconds, they fled in panic and screamed. After taking care of all the guards at the door, Chu Ming easily entered the royal capital. But before he had gone far, the city guard knights who received the news rushed over and surrounded him in the middle of the street. Stop. Chu Ming stopped, turned around, glanced at all the city guard knights, and said with a smile. Haha, it's really a bunch of demons dancing around, not a single human being. As he finished speaking, his eyes turned blood red. Suddenly strong winds gathered, the air gradually became heavy and dense, and the city guard knights suddenly found it difficult to breathe. Chu Ming held the long sword in his hand and took a step forward. King's pressure. The endless hurricane fell to the ground with this movement. As if they were hit hard, everyone vomited blood and fell to their knees, revealing their ugly dark original form. It is like a young man walking among a group of demons. If he takes a step with a sword, if the sword rises or falls, some of his heads will fall to the ground. The corpse fell to the ground, and black blood spurted out, spreading outward along the gaps between the stone bricks. It was like flowers of sin were blooming on the ground. After a cup of tea, Chu Ming was the only one left standing on the street, surrounded by monster corpses piled up into a hill. The blood mist slowly floated out from the corpse and lingered around his body. The blood in his eyes became more intense as he looked towards the palace not far away. Jiwen, I'm here, In the palace, there was singing and dancing, and the nobles gathered around the long table, drinking and talking. If you ignore the bloody pieces of meat on the table and the horrifying conversations of the nobles, this banquet looks perfectly normal. Beside the long table, Monroe sat on his seat, eyes tightly closed, his knife and fork untouched. A nobleman next to Monroe glanced at the shining knife and fork in front of him, and asked with a smile, "Duke Monroe, this virgin's flesh and blood is really delicious. What do you think of it?" When the other nobles heard his question, they stopped their knives and forks and stared at Monroe closely. Monroe replied calmly, "Armin, you know I don't eat these." "Really, it's such a pity," Armin said regretfully. "I originally wanted to share the meat I raised in captivity with you. But Monroe, I am very interested in the student named Andrew in your college. You won't refuse to share it with us. Speaking of which, I haven't tasted the flesh and blood of a half-blood knight." A noble's appetite was aroused and he licked his blood-stained lips. "Ha ha ha, gentlemen, I also want to try it." The nobles talked to each other, and in the pleasant conversation, they had already regarded Andrew as a meal on the plate, and they wished they could catch him on the dining table now, gnaw on the flesh and blood, and break the bones and marrow. Monroe looked at everyone deeply and said nothing. The nobles were unforgiving and chatted freely, expressing their contempt for Andrew in their words. Suddenly there was movement from ahead. Dong dong. Rhythmic table knocking sounded, and everyone immediately booed and looked towards the front of the long table. Even though this impolite behavior was not in line with noble etiquette, no one dared to speak out and denounce it. At the head of the long table, the troll king Gavin Spears opened his deep eyes, clasped his hands, and looked at Monroe at the table. "Monroe, the students in your college seem to be restless." Monroe's expression remained unchanged and he said respectfully, "Your Highness Jiwen, I will deal with it right now." "No." Jiwen slowly stood up, his tall figure of 1.9 meters giving people a full sense of oppression. "He's already here. I will personally dissect his flesh and blood and place it on the table." As soon as the man finished speaking, the palace door roared and collapsed, shattering the glazed windows at the top of the palace. Colorful glass fragments fell like rain, reflecting the magnificent light in the sun. Chu Ming bathed in the light and walked to the long table with a long sword in his hand. "Gavin Spears, I am your killer." After saying that, Chu Ming raised his middle finger to him. Ah! Jiwen narrowed his eyes. Although he didn't know what the middle finger meant, he felt insulted. "Andrew, it seems that Baron Harold has not taught you what etiquette is." The man bent his legs and flew towards Chu Ming like a cannonball. Boom! The fist landed on the long sword, and the scattered colored glaze was instantly rushed to both sides by the air current. Before a few unlucky nobles could react, they were hit by the shock wave against pillars and walls. Among them was Armin, who took the lead in humiliating Monroe and mocking Chu Ming. Chu Ming withstood the heavy pressure and did not retreat. The gold-encrusted red carpet under his feet sunk a little deeper into the floor. "Kneel down." Blood pressure. The man shouted angrily, and an invisible coercion spread throughout the palace. The gems inlaid on the pillars fell one after another, and the nobles near the long table also bent down. "You, just, kneel down for me." Chu Ming gritted his teeth and glared angrily. King's pressure. Strong winds gathered and swept across the entire palace. Broken glass flew up like hailstones and quickly hit Jiwen. The two pressures collided and refused to give in. The palace could not withstand the pressure. The pillars exploded and stones fell to the ground. The nobles no longer had the elegance they had before, and the contempt for Chu Ming in their eyes turned into fear. They panicked and fled in all directions. The weaker one among them had no time to escape, and his internal organs were squeezed together by the pressure, and his whole body exploded into a cloud of blood. Ironically, Armin, who was rude at the beginning, could not even resist the aftermath of the initial battle and died on the spot. Well, Jiwen's face turned gloomy as he felt this power that was not weaker than his own. "Andrew." The man pulled out a slender steel sword, waved his strong arm, drew a dazzling trajectory, and slashed towards Chu Ming at high speed. In an instant, the black snake sense activated, and Chu Ming waved his long sword to meet him. Clang! The two swords clashed, causing sparks to fly. The two of them each took a step back, with solemn expressions, and quickly swung their swords. Stab, cut, chop. In just a few seconds, the two had exchanged blows several times. Every time there was a confrontation, huge power would be transmitted through the ground to the entire palace, and the entire building would be overwhelmed and crumbling. Finally, with a loud rumbling sound, the huge palace cover broke and fell straight to the ground. In the horrified eyes of the embarrassed nobles, the palace collapsed, dust and smoke rose, and everything was buried. Just when everyone was about to end the battle, a tall 4-meter dark troll burst out from the ruins. Before these troll nobles could show their joyful expressions, another tall figure jumped out of the ruins, grabbed the Troll King and threw him to the ground, creating a deep pit on the ground and smashing through several walls. "This is Andrew." Monroe shrank his eyes and saw clearly the appearance of the darkened Andrew. "I saw a snake-like beast that was 4 meters tall, covered with streamlined black scales, standing in the impact crater. His strong and powerful snake tail slapped the ground, causing the floor to crack instantly." Ahem. The Troll King Jiwen climbed up from the ruins, with a bit of ridicule in his expression. "Is the power of darkness easy to use? Killing you is enough." Chu Ming ignored the sarcasm in his tone, his breath sank, his feet planted firmly on the ground, and his right arm with black scales as dazzling as obsidian came out with hurricane force and pressure. Boom! The violent cyclone broke through the clouds and cracked the stone, rushing towards Jarvan, and the gravel slapped against him. The man's eyes were bloodshot, and a violent aura rose from his body. He actually stood upright and resisted the punch. "I am Jarvan, King of Trolls." The monster roared loudly, endless pressure burst out, and the strong wind directly eliminated the invisible force. The man hunched his huge body, stepped out with one step, and was within a stone's throw of 100 meters away. He clasped his fists together and smashed towards Chu Ming. At the critical moment, the black snake's sense activated again, and he shifted his body to avoid the vital point. There was a dull sound of bones breaking, and Chu Ming flew backwards, with several ribs broken. Puff! Then, the bone stubble penetrated into the lungs, the alveoli ruptured, and a large amount of blood poured into the trachea. He couldn't help vomiting blood and started coughing. Before he could calm down, Jiwen strode closer, grabbed the black-scaled snake's tail, and threw him hard against a palace pillar not far away. The pillar broke on the spot, and with a loud roar, huge rocks fell and hit Chu Ming. Dust rose and Chu Ming was buried in it. "Andrew, when it comes to strength, you are no match for me." Jiwen stared at the ruins and slowly approached. "I know," a weak voice sounded from the ruins. Chu Ming lifted the pillar of the statue, revealing a body covered in scars and covered with black blood. He endured the pain and inserted his hand into the flesh and blood of his chest, pushing the broken bones back into place. Muscles squirmed, bones were immobilized, and blood flow stopped in wounds. He slowly raised his head and looked at Jiwen. "Jiwen, compared to yours, my power is indeed too immature. But you seem to have been a monster for so long that you forgot that in addition to your own strength, a knight's weapons are also very important." After saying that, Chu Ming pulled out the hunter's sword that was lost just now from the ruins. The moment his hand grasped the sword again, the remaining blood mist on the red sword climbed up his body. The hunting frenzy is triggered, and the blood mist turns into power. The aura in his body continued to rise, and his aura instantly overwhelmed the Troll King Jiwen opposite him. The next second, Chu Ming crashed into Jiwen quickly, a red light flashed, and one of Jiwen's arms flew out. Ah! Pain like gangrene wrapped around Jiwen's nerves, and the expression on his face became more and more crazy. Before he could resist, the next second, the long sword struck through the air, and his huge body was directly smashed into the stone slab. Bang bang bang! Under the horrified gaze of the remaining nobles who had no time to escape, the Troll King was unable to resist and was pinned down by Chu Ming and beaten wildly. After beating him for several minutes, Chu Ming's chest heaved violently, breathing heavily, and raised his exhausted arms. "Andrew." Jiwen lay bloody in the pit. The violence in his eyes gradually dissipated. He coughed a few times and suddenly laughed. "Ha ha, there's nothing you can do to stop it. The trend is unstoppable. Only by walking with darkness can mankind usher in the final salvation. If I die today, I will become the next Troll King. If it's not you, it will be someone else." Chu Ming lowered his head to look at Jiwen, trying hard to control the violence surging in his heart, and said in a calm tone, "Then please die first." Invisible pressure fell along with the strong wind, and Jiwen roared feebly, unable to move. "The world will eventually be dark, Andrew, time will prove you wrong." As soon as he finished speaking, the troll's body exploded, scattering blood mist, dyeing everyone present blood red. Ah! The nobles screamed, their bodies trembling, and their eyes full of fear. The scene of Jiwen being crushed alive lingered in their minds like a nightmare, and their fear of Chu Ming had reached its extreme. Some people even fell to their knees with their legs weak, shouting names like the King of Trolls, Lord Andrew, and crawled towards him. Noisy. Red light flashed across, the head fell to the ground, and Chu Ming's eyes were filled with coldness. Master Andrew, let me go. Let me go. The troll nobles looked crazy. Faced with the impending death, they no longer took any chances and ran away dragging their broken bodies. Chu Ming looked indifferent and turned a deaf ear. The blood vessels on his body as tall as a giant tower squirmed, and his thick legs were slightly bent, bursting out with amazing power. The next second, the stone slab under his feet cracked, and he rushed out. Everything in his path was shattered, and dozens of nobles were crushed into minced flesh under his feet. The screams gradually subsided, and Chu Ming stopped. Hoo-hoo. Heavy breathing sounded, and he stood there for a while, dragging his heavy body towards the only living person in the bloody palace. Andrew, how's it going? Just as Monroe was about to step forward to help him, the man suddenly raised his head. In a daze, Monroe saw Chu Ming's crazy and terrifying eyes. Before he could react, a violent rage rushed straight to his head. The old man immediately froze on the spot, with cold sweat breaking out behind him. Dean Monroe, I'm sorry, I scared you. Chu Ming's voice was hoarse, and the blood in his eyes faded a little. The old man shook his head and said, as long as you're fine. Are my father and others safe? Baron Harold is safe and sound, it's just Lawrence. Monroe was silent for a moment, then raised his hand slightly, and a black light spun and transformed into a black crow. He's not in good condition. I'll take you to have a look. When Chu Ming heard this, he froze on the spot and nodded heavily. The black light lit up, and the two people appeared on the wall of the royal capital. At this time, the sun was setting in the west, and the thin dusk light spread on them, dyeing their entire bodies orange. Chu Ming stretched out his hand to cover the glow and saw clearly Lawrence sitting in a wheelchair not far away and Harold and Jai Hai standing beside him. Master, are you okay? Jai Hai, who spotted Chu Ming on the side, waved to him. After reporting safety to Jai Hai and the others, he walked behind Lawrence. Teacher Lawrence. The old man had a peaceful face and did not respond while lying in his wheelchair. Monroe sighed, stepped forward and patted his shoulder. The divine secret medicine destroyed his body, it's a miracle that he can still insist on returning to the capital. He once told me that you were his most proud student, but during that year in the royal capital, due to the deep-rooted troll aristocratic power, he tried hard not to involve you, and even did not hesitate to use harsh words. The language alienates you. It's a pity that he still couldn't hold on until you came back. I couldn't put aside my dignity and say sorry to you. Chu Ming's eyes drooped and he clenched his fists. Dean Monroe, take good care of my father and Jai Hai. I haven't finished my work yet. Jai Hai asked anxiously. Master, where are you going? Chu Ming looked back at him, jumped off the city wall, and left only one sentence. Kill all the trolls. In Dark Age 8418, the snake demon knight Andrew bloodbathed the royal capital, killed the troll king, and carried out a general purge of the rodent kingdom. He disappeared after that. In Dark Age 9132, darkness flooded the world and Intinuit died. The pages of history books are turning, and new history appears. His consciousness gradually returned to reality, and Chu Ming passed out directly on the bed, unconscious. After accepting the power of darkness, the mental burden of writing history on his real body has increased a lot. His ability to persist in exiting the writing state until Andrew's carrier dies is already the limit. Time passed, and Chu Ming slept until noon the next day before waking up. It's too much fun. Chu Ming smiled bitterly, summoned the history book, and checked the updated history on it. After defeating the Troll King, he worked non-stop and spent a year purging the entire kingdom of troll forces. In the end, when Chu Ming felt that he was about to lose control of the dark power, he drained his blood and gave it to Monroe. He returned to the snowy ridge in the land of death and committed suicide amidst the mournful cry of the snow eagle. After that, the history of the other world continued to advance, and the kingdom of Rodon established a new crown prince. Following the will of the legendary knight, Andrew, he began a vigorous demon hunting campaign, effectively controlling the troll disaster. After preserving its vitality, the kingdom of Rodan survived the tide of darkness 58 years later and became the only surviving human civilization in Intinuit. However, it is regrettable that for more than 700 years, humans in other worlds still cannot solve the problem of bloodline shackles, and their extraordinary power has not been able to break through the upper limit. On the contrary, as the extraordinary power weakened, the kingdom of Rodan finally found it difficult to cultivate even great knights. Facing the increasingly powerful dark creatures, human civilization began to become hysterical. Not only did it overthrow the statue of the legendary knight, Andrew, erected in Niho College, but also executed a group of demon hunters, returning to the embrace of darkness again. At this point, the history in the history books came to an end, and in the end the world was still submerged in darkness. Chu Ming shook his head and sighed. Sure enough, if we don't solve the problem of bloodline shackles, it will be difficult to truly change the future. After his and Lawrence's deaths, the secret recipe for the secret elixir was lost. And the divine power contained in the blood drawn from his body was too depleted and could not work at all. However, although this writing was unsuccessful, it did allow me to uncover the mystery of the trolls and learn how to deal with them. Chu Ming flashed slightly and thought about how to deal with the troll. Although bloodline shackles sound like some real organ of the human body, they are actually some kind of spiritual contract formed by the agreement between order and human consciousness. This contract cannot be resisted by humans born in order, but if a certain human can break through the restrictions of blood shackles and cut off the last link between humans and order, humans can be liberated from the enslavement of gods. Although I don't know what the consequences will be if we lose contact with God, the ancient God has passed away long ago. It is time for mankind to get rid of the last burden and move towards a new era. After thinking for a while, Chu Ming opened the history book and looked at the Andrew card. Snake Demon Knight Andrew. Quality: Blue. Race: Dark Creature. Skills: King's Coercion, Devil's Muscle, Black Snake Sense, Sword Mastery Intermediate. Chu Ming raised his eyebrows slightly when he saw the information on the card. To his surprise, this Snake Demon Knight card did not turn into a black card like other cards stained with darkness after it appeared in reality. After thinking for a long time, he couldn't figure it out. He could only attribute this to the special nature of history books. This should be considered an unexpected gain. However, the Snake Demon Knight exudes a dark aura and looks more like a dark creature than a troll. It is estimated that once it is taken out, it will be besieged by other card masters before it is attacked by the enemy. Chu Ming secretly wiped his sweat at the thought of being beaten by a group of card masters. Let's keep writing. Turning his mind back to the book, Chu Ming's expression became serious. He wants to start the third episode to undo his mistakes and save those who died because of the trolls. As long as he can obtain the complete divine secret medicine and eliminate the interference of the Black Snake bloodline on the secret medicine, then he can break the shackles of the bloodline, end the era of trolls, and correct the wrong future guided by the Blue Star Card Master. Bring it on. Chu Ming took a deep breath and turned the history book to the first page. The fonts on the book twisted, and he was in a trance, returning to the night before going to the church. Time: Dark Age 8413. Location: Rodan Kingdom, Black Snake Town. Vector: Official Knight Andrew. Consciousness gradually returned, and the flickering candlelight in front of him became stable. The time point of entry has actually changed. A surprised look flashed in Chu Ming's eyes. He always thought that the time point for entering the writing state with the same card would be the same. Unexpectedly, this time the timeline came to the night before he was about to go up the mountain to confront Lyle. But it doesn't hurt. Shaking his head, Chu Ming looked at the black snake fang in his hand with a complicated expression. The blood of the black snake once gave him great strength and helped him defeat countless powerful enemies, but he did not expect that it would become his hindrance in the end. After sighing for a while, Chu Ming put the black snake fangs back into the box and returned to the bed to sit cross-legged and meditate. In his mind, the profound secrets of the griffin appeared like a star map, and he illuminated them one by one. I don't know how much time passed, but when the first ray of sunshine in the morning shone through the window, the breeze danced in the room, and Chu Ming took a long breath. The golden light surged on the pages of the history book, and new changes appeared. Hunting Knight Andrew. Quality: green. Race: human race. Skills: King's Wind, Life Strengthening Intermediate, Sword Mastery Intermediate. The time of one night was really limited. Chu Ming only realized the secret kingly style of the Griffin secret technique in advance, but did not realize the leap in life level. If you want to upgrade your life enhancement to a high level, practicing secret techniques is only one part of it, and strength training is also essential. During the second week, Chu Ming had been training hard for 4 years in order to break through to the Great Knight. After comprehending the mysteries of the secret method, he successfully broke through to the Great Knight. But now he has taken the shortcut that only geniuses can take. He first understands the most difficult secrets and then practices hard. Therefore, his current strength is only close to dark green, and has not reached the level of a Great Knight. But killing a chicken with a sledgehammer is enough. This strength is enough to deal with Lyle. After putting on his cloak and armor, Chu Ming went out in the drizzle. He was in a hurry today and had to complete the process before the heavy rain came and then rush home to have a bowl of hot soup. The sky was overcast and the rain was getting heavier. Chu and Ming arrived in front of the church. After turning his head and giving Baron Harold a reassuring look, Chu Ming pushed open the church door and walked in. In the church, the orange candlelight added a bit of warmth to the church. Lyle sat on the seat, clasped his hands and closed his eyes to pray. Lyle, long time no see. Chu Ming pulled back his wet hood and smiled, as if he was happy to see Lyle. Master Andrew. Lyle slowly stood up from his seat and looked at Chu Ming behind him in surprise. Excuse me, Master, what can I do? It's okay. Chu Ming shook his head. I'm just here to go through the process. Process. The confusion on Lyle's face became even worse. He had no idea why Chu Ming appeared here and what strange words he was saying. Yes, Pastor Lyle, please cooperate. Chu Ming's eyes narrowed, and the strong wind blew, pressing down on Lyle with great force. The man couldn't even resist and fell to his knees directly on the ground, his face turning the color of pig liver. Master Andrew, let me. Before Lyle could finish speaking, his head was knocked out and rolled to the ground like a broken ball. His eyes were wide open, and his death was unclear. I didn't expect that the once powerful enemy would be so fragile. Recalling the embarrassment he looked like when he was in Jomu, Chu Ming sighed, wiped the blood off the long sword, and walked out of the church. After solving Lyle, life in Black Snake Town returned to peace. In order to reach the level of a Great Knight as soon as possible, Chu Ming conducted devil training on himself before midsummer came. Of course, Jai Hai, as the attendant knight who was about to go to the royal capital with him, was also fortunate to be able to enjoy this benefit. But Jai Hai didn't think this was a benefit. Years later, when he recalled this time, his teeth would chatter. Midsummer. As the enrollment time approached, Chu Ming bid farewell to Baron Harold and everyone in the Cavaliers and set foot on the road to the royal capital again. This time, Chu Ming did not choose those remote routes. Instead, he and Jai Hai followed the main roads and headed into some big towns. With his current strength, there is no need to fear the trolls in these villages and towns who only have green strength. Of course, he will kill everyone he sees. These trolls are ruthless people who like to eat human flesh, and he will not show mercy at all. By the time the two of them were approaching Port Tello, Chu Ming had killed more than 100 people along the way. Arriving at Port Tello again, Chu Ming took Jai Hai directly to Grote's Manor following his memory. Although he didn't know why Chu Ming was so skilled, Jai Hai had long been accustomed to such incidents. When Chu Ming killed the first troll, he was still shocked as to why Chu Ming would kill people for no reason. However, after he saw those trolls reveal their true forms, his doubts about Chu Ming changed. Worship. After walking for a few minutes, the two arrived at the entrance of the manor. Master, let me come. Jai Hai diligently stepped forward and knocked on the rose-covered door of the manor. After a while, a familiar figure appeared in front of Chu Ming. The maid glanced at the two of them with some fear and lowered her head. Excuse me, gentlemen, what can I do for you? Chu Ming glanced down at the timid girl with evasive eyes, and chuckled. We are here to find Grote, please give him this letter. The girl bowed slightly and took the letter with both hands. Gentlemen, please wait a moment. The maid did not dare to neglect. carefully put the letter in her arms, and ran into the mansion in small steps. Seeing the smile on Chu Ming's face, Jai scratched his head in confusion. Master, why do I feel like you know her? Really, that should be like an acquaintance of mine. As soon as he heard the word acquaintance, Jai's heart suddenly skipped a beat. When passing through those towns before, Chu Ming also said that those monsters were his acquaintances, and then without any reason, he just chopped them down with a sword. The young master is not going to kill his sister to prove his faith this time. Jai sighed inwardly. What a lovely girl, how could she be a monster? What a pity. The two waited at the door for a short while. The maid panted and anxiously ran back to welcome them in. Fortunately, Chu Ming's violent murder did not happen, and the three of them walked into the mansion peacefully. Inside the mansion, the walls are covered with exquisite paintings, and there are many valuable items on display. Even the dark brown wooden boards exude a light sandalwood scent, and you can tell at a glance that they are expensive. Jai, who had been in Black Snake Town for decades, had never seen this kind of world. If he wasn't afraid of losing face by being too arrogant, he would almost have his eyes popped out. Under the leadership of the girl, the two walked to a study room and met the owner of the mansion, an old man with a peaceful face and kind eyes. At this time, the old man was sitting at the desk, reading books. Mr. Grote. Chu Ming came to the desk, smiled and narrowed his eyes. The old man was stunned, then smiled when he saw Chu Ming, sat up tremblingly and wanted to hold his hand. Andrew, welcome to Portutello. When the maid on the side saw Grote getting up, her eyes were fearful, her body trembled unconsciously, and for a moment she forgot to step forward to support him. The old man held Chu Ming's hand and glanced at the girl with a casual look. A touch of coldness passed quickly, and then his smile returned. When the girl was stared at like this, her face instantly turned pale, her eyes became even more frightened, and she subconsciously leaned behind Chu Ming. Mr. Grote. The old man interrupted Chu Ming before he finished speaking. Andrew, don't be too outspoken, just call me uncle. Chu Ming smiled and asked, my dear uncle, what is your business here? The old man smiled and waved his hand. Haha, it's just helping people move some goods, it's not worth mentioning. Yeah, Chu Ming smiled coldly, and Jai seemed to notice something, shouting that something was wrong, and hid behind him quickly and skillfully. The young man bent down and sniffed the old man. Why do you smell dirty? Grote's face changed slightly when he heard this. Before he could react, Chu Ming grabbed the old man's neck hard and lifted him up amid the girl's exclamation. Andrew, what are you doing? Grote kicked his legs feebly, his eyes filled with fear. Chu Ming smiled slightly and said, do what you have done before. Then he grabbed Grote's hair and dragged him out. Andrew. The old man struggled desperately, revealing his ugly dark original body, but no matter how hard he struggled or begged, he could never escape Chu Ming's strong arms. Jai, come here. Chu Ming's voice sounded from the front. Jai patted his cheek and followed curiously. The girl who was standing there in a daze on the side struggled for a while when she saw everyone leaving, and then she followed them. She knew this was her only chance to save her sister. Chapter 31. The old man's painful groans resounded throughout the corridor. As the group of people gradually walked out of the mansion, the woman who appeared next to Grote last week hurried over. When she saw the miserable look of the old man in front of her, she couldn't help but exclaimed. Master Grote, who are you and what are you doing? The woman was sullen, stepped forward, grabbed Chu Ming's hand, and scratched it with her nails. It's a pity that the young man's arm was wrapped in steel armor, and the woman's nails couldn't be touched. Chu Ming stopped and glanced at her. Madam, do you want to die? The woman's face turned pale, her hands loosened, and she stood uneasily. Help me. Grote, who had his head scratched, came to his senses, begged and stretched out his hand to the woman. The woman had nowhere to put her hands, and stood there with a frightened look on her face, watching helplessly as Grote was taken away by Chu Ming. In fact, she knew the identity of Grote Monster, but for the sake of his wealth and to get a hold of him, the woman kept pretending not to know. Now that something happened to Grote, her first thought was not to save him, but to take away the treasure hidden in the basement. The woman stood there anxiously for a while. Seeing that Chu Ming was not coming back, she finally calmed down and walked towards the basement. On the garden road, Chu Ming kept dragging the old man out of the mansion. No matter how he shouted and cried for mercy, the young man always had a cold face. Nina, who was following behind, was not frightened by Chu Ming's terrifying behavior. Instead, she felt an unprecedented sense of security in her heart. Let me go, let me go. Andrew, I'm your uncle. The old man was full of ugliness, sometimes angrily accusing Chu Ming, sometimes crying and begging for mercy, expressing his emotions vividly. Chu Ming didn't say anything, but just slammed him against the cellar door. Only a bang was heard, the door lock chain was dragged, and the cellar door collapsed. Sunlight poured into the dark and damp cellar, and the little girl covered with scars on the ground weakly opened her eyes. Uni. The moment she saw the little girl, the maid burst into tears and ran in desperately to hug her. Jai, take her out to see a doctor. Chu Ming gave Jai instructions, then grabbed the old man and walked deep into the cellar. After seeing the boy walking into the darkness, Jai, who had full confidence in him, did not hesitate. He picked up the little girl on the ground and ran out with Nina. Deep in the cellar, the old man wailed in a low voice, and the clothes on his back were stained with blood on the rough ground. Chu Ming looked up at the countless hooks on his head and the pieces of flesh that smelled of blood, and took a deep breath. Invisible wind pressure raged out, crushing all the flesh and blood into minced flesh and blowing a bloody wind out of the cellar. Groot, do you like eating human flesh? Chu Ming grabbed the old man's neck and pulled him up from the ground. Groot's eyes were filled with fear, and he shook his head hard. I don't want to eat. I hate it when people lie to me. Chu Ming's eyes did not waver. He shook his head and threw the old man upward. The black hook pierced his chest, and Groot screamed in pain. No, 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 Andrew, let me go, I won't dare again. A fire ignited the entire manor, and Chu Ming turned towards Jai, who was standing on the street waiting. Let's go. Jai nodded and took Chu Ming to a small church in the slums of Port Tello. In this era, healing is the function of priests. They monopolize almost all medical resources. If they want to see a doctor, ordinary people can only spend money to go to the church clergy. Only the rich and aristocratic had the ability and resources to train domestic servant doctors, while ordinary people still had to come to the church regardless of their serious illness or minor illness. The two turned into the backyard of the church and entered a room under the leadership of the pastor. Nina heard movement at the door and turned around to see Chu Ming walking in. Her eyes were red and she knelt down excitedly. Thank you, two adults. Chu Ming patted her head and comforted her. It's okay, everything is over. After comforting the girl, he checked on the little girl's condition. After confirming that she was fine, he and Jai exited the room. Jai, it's time to leave. Master, are you leaving so soon? Jai was stunned, but we have just arrived in Porto Tello not long ago. When Chu Ming heard this, he patted his head. He almost forgot that Jai had no memory of the previous week's trip, so naturally he didn't know that he had already visited Port Tello. Then rest here for 2 days before leaving. After deciding to stay for 2 days, Chu Ming gave Jai a holiday and allowed him to wander around on his own. As for him, he did not intend to miss any opportunity to improve his strength and continued to practice hard in the yard. 2 days passed in a hurry, and it was time to say goodbye. Before leaving, Chu Ming secretly stuffed a bag of gold coins into a kind-hearted fat nun in the church and asked her to take in Nina and the two. As the sky dawned, Chu and Ming mounted their horses and said goodbye to everyone. Under the girls' grateful eyes, they continued towards the royal capital. A week later, in the wilderness, the sound of horse trampling gradually stopped. Chu Ming rode a black horse and looked at the dark and cold stone wall in front of him. He murmured softly, Kingdu, I'm back. Jai scratched his head in confusion. He didn't know when the young master had been to the capital. Before he could figure it out, Chu Ming pulled up the reins and rode the black horse towards the royal capital. Master, wait for me. Jihale turned his horse's head and quickly followed. There are still the same few guards at the entrance of the royal capital, and the city guard knights in the city are patrolling the streets. Chu Ming successfully entered the royal capital as the son of a nobleman without being blocked by these former enemies. The two got off their horses and walked for a while before entering Niho College. Looking at the familiar building, Chu Ming didn't sigh too much. After leaving the horses in the college stables, he walked straight to the dean's office. Dong dong dong. Chu Ming knocked on the door gently. Please come in. A magnetic male voice came from inside. Opening the door, Chu Ming walked inside, smiled and saluted the old man in front of him. Hello, Dean Monroe. After that, he handed over the admission notice. Monroe took the scroll and glanced at Chu Ming in confusion. Why did he feel that the young man in front of him seemed to know him? This classmate Andrew, have we met before? Chu Ming shook his head. Seeing this, the old man could only hide his doubts in his heart and read the information on the admission notice carefully. When Monroe saw the information in the strength column, he suddenly raised his head and looked at Chu Ming. A 16-year-old official knight is simply incredible. I didn't expect that the Black Snake Knight would have such an amazing descendant. The dean is too praiseworthy. The corners of Chu Ming's mouth raised slightly. Actually, this was just my strength a month ago. Dean Monroe was stunned for a moment, then asked with a disinterested smile, what about your current strength? Chu Ming said nothing, staring at Monroe closely. Suddenly, a breeze started blowing up in the dean's room, and the papers on Monroe's desk fluttered and made a snapping sound. Is this the great knight's secret? Monroe's eyes were shocked and he stood up directly. The old man swallowed hard. Are you already a great knight now? Chu Ming shook his head. I just touched the threshold, and it's not even close to being heated. But I believe I can break through to the level of a great knight within a year. After listening to the young man's words, Monroe couldn't calm down. He came to Chu Ming for a while and hesitated to speak, and for a while he wandered in place. Seeing the old man's hesitant look, Chu Ming certainly knew what he was thinking, so he directly asked, Dean Monroe, do you want to deal with Jarvan Spears? Monroe immediately stopped after saying something shocking. A look of surprise flashed in his eyes, and then his expression became serious. Where did you learn His Highness Jiwen's name? Chu Ming did not answer this question, but faced the old man directly and said seriously, as long as you can support my actions, I will be able to kill the Troll King within a year and completely solve the troll disaster. The young man's arrogant words immediately calmed Monroe down. After the entire dean's room was silent for a while, the old man finally spoke. Please give me a reason to believe you. Chu Ming nodded, and suddenly with lightning speed, he grabbed a black object into the dark corner of the dean's room, and he threw it out. The black object bounced onto the desk and suddenly made a wailing sound. Ouch, you guys just chat, why am I suffering? After the words fell, the unknown object spread its wings and jumped onto the shoulders of Monroe, who looked ugly. Jae-hi's eyes widened and he stuttered when speaking. Young master, this thing is actually alive. Jae-hi has never seen big winds and waves, but he really has never seen anything like this. After Chu Ming patted Jae-hi's shoulder to comfort him, he looked at Monroe. Dean Monroe, I know you, Lawrence, and Jiwen very well. I also know very well Jiwen's strength. Jiwen is not invincible, and I also have a way to solve the troll disaster. With your help, I can build up the power to fight the trolls faster. Monroe's expression softened slightly, and he had a new understanding of Chu Ming. Although I don't know how the young man in front of me can see the truth about the royal capital and understand him so well, he is indeed a pure human being. He did not sense any dark aura in Andrew. Based on this alone, the boy was worthy of his trust. Andrew, I can trust you and I can give you my all. But before that, I want to hear your plan. After saying that, the old man stretched out his right hand. Chu Ming smiled slightly and held the old man's hand. I won't let you down. After a cup of tea, Chu and Ming left the dean's office and walked towards the library. In front of the window of the dean's office, Monroe stared at Chu Ming's back for a long time in trance. Monroe, the black crow tilted his head and looked at the old man. I'm fine. The old man shook his head and sighed. It seems that the Rodent Kingdom, no, the whole world will change soon. Andrew, are you the savior or the next Troll King? But since I chose to trust, I have to bear it myself no matter whether I am happy or regretful in the end. Walking on the stone brick road, Chu Ming's face was as usual, and despite the naked and hungry wolf-like looks of some students, he arrived at the library building, where he had stayed for a year. Chu Ming became anxious when he was about to see Lawrence again. His eyes flashed slightly, he knocked on the door and shouted inside, Mr. Lawrence, Dean Monroe asked me to come to you. Having learned the lesson of being almost rejected last week, Chu-Ming knocked on the door and moved out of Dean Monroe. Monroe's name was indeed useful, and after a while, Lawrence's voice came from inside. "Come in." Instructing Jai behind him to follow, Chu-Ming opened the door and walked to the counter. Beside the counter, the old man was lying on a chair as if he was asleep. "Mr. Lawrence, Dean Monroe asked me to give this to you." Chu-Ming didn't dare to hesitate, and rushed to the old man before he started to curse, and handed over the letter he had asked Monroe to write in advance. The content of the letter included Chu-Ming's identity information and other details, and the content of the conversation in the dean's office was also summarized in it. With the help of letters, Chu-Ming saved a lot of trouble. At least he didn't have to explain it to Lawrence again. Lawrence lay on the chair and read the letter quietly, then raised his head and looked at him. "HMPH, good job." The old man snorted softly and turned over. "We'll wait until you break through the great night. The secret method is on the table. You can get it by yourself. You can choose the room by yourself, but you can't go up to the second floor." As he talked, the old man seemed to have fallen into a deep sleep and stopped paying attention to people. Picking up the secret method on the table, Chu-Ming breathed a sigh of relief. With Lawrence's stubborn temper and cautious and tolerant character, it is very difficult to make him believe in himself. If his strength had not reached the threshold of a great knight, or if he did not have Monroe's letter, the old man would not trust him. After all, Lawrence had devoted his whole life to developing the mysterious secret medicine, and failure was something he could not accept now. History has not developed yet when Jomu entered the land of death, and he is far less calm and courageous to accept death and failure than he was a few years later. "Jai, go and help me clean up the room. I'll go out first." "Okay, don't worry, young master. I promise to clean it up for you." Chu-Ming patted Jai, turned around and walked out of the door, his expression calm. Before he entered the academy, things were not easy for Lawrence. A disabled human without any strength wants to survive in this academy full of trolls, and the hardships involved are unknown. Even Dean Monroe couldn't help Lawrence in order to maintain his relationship with Jiwen and the nobles and gain their trust. Moreover, Lawrence did have a bad character when he was young. He was too proud and did not take other knights into consideration, which offended many people. After he fell into despair, these knights who turned to the dark side naturally would not let him go and humiliated him one after another. But now that Chu-Ming has returned to the academy again, he will naturally not let these people run rampant again. It's time for a reckoning. The young man narrowed his eyes slightly and took out a scroll from his waist. This was a list provided by Dean Monroe. The people on it were all people in the college who had a grudge against Lawrence and had bullied him. Among them are tutors and students. In Niho College, except for Dean Monroe, his strength is not afraid of anyone. He just beats them one by one according to the list. With Dean Monroe helping to cover, even if there are some people missing inexplicably in the college, the nobles will not notice it quickly. When they discovered it later, Chu-Ming also had the confidence to fight against everything. While walking on a remote path, Chu-Ming's thinking was suddenly interrupted. A voice came from the front and he stopped. "Is it junior brother Andrew?" Not far away, Haji waved to him with a smile. Chu-Ming was stunned for a moment, smiled with a meaningless smile, and stepped forward to greet him. "Senior Haji, how did you know that I wanted to find you?" In the evening, when Chu-Ming returned to the library, the sky had completely darkened. "Boy, where have you been?" Lawrence came over pushing the wheelchair. Chu-Ming smiled and said, "It's just to solve some troubles. Let's not talk about this for now. Let's eat first." He put down the food box in his hand and called out Jai, who was cleaning hard. "Master, here we come." Jai came out dressed as a nanny and wearing an apron. After dinner time, Lawrence put down his knife and fork and coldly pushed his wheelchair up to the second floor. Before leaving, he left a message. "The secret medicine you want will take half a year." "Understood." Chu-Ming smiled. Half year later. In Chu-Ming's room, black light surged, and a black crow appeared, standing on the bedside. And what appeared with it was a crimson long sword. "Quack, what I wanted has arrived. I'm almost exhausted." Chu-Ming picked up the hunter's sword on the bed, with a look of nostalgia in his eyes. "Uncle Black Crow, that's a big help." "Huh, that's right." Black Crow crossed his arms and became angry. When I take action, there is no reason for me to miss. Quack, quack, that stupid bird in the snow mountain was so frightened that he trembled when he saw me, and he didn't dare to stop him at all. Chu Ming glanced at the butt exposed by the black crow's bald tail feathers and said nothing. Hee hee. Black Crow moved his body and complained, this thing is hidden so deep. How did you find it? It kept me busy for a month. It's been handed down from our ancestors. Chu Ming made a nonsense statement and acted as a driving force. Uncle Black Crow, you should go, I still have to practice. Boy, the Black Crow cursed a few words, and left the room with a flash of black light. Chu Ming put down the black snake sword, inserted the hunter's sword into the specially customized scabbard, and then pinned it to his waist. Then he opened the door and went out to train as usual. After more than half a year of hard training, the Griffin's secret technique has become impossible to advance. He can feel that he will soon be able to break through to the Great Knight. Passing by the stairs on the second floor, Chu Ming glanced upstairs. Seeing that there was no movement above, he took steps to leave. Suddenly Lawrence's voice came down from upstairs. Andrew, come up here. Has the secret medicine been developed? Chu Ming's mind moved, he stepped onto the second floor and opened the door deep down. After entering the room, a familiar red light filled the air, and Chu Ming glanced at his arm as if aware of it. I could see the faint black lines on my arms emitting black smoke as if they were being burned. The darkness brought by the bloodline shackles temporarily faded away in the radiance of the divine secret medicine. Is this the original magical secret medicine? Chu Ming was shocked in his heart. Lawrence leaned on the table, his face full of exhaustion, and turned to look at him. The war contained in the divine secret medicine is still too weak, and it is impossible to fight against the bloodline shackles by normal means. My original plan was to go to the land of death to collect more divine power in that place filled with all kinds of contradictions and struggles. But you said there is a way to solve the problem of weak divine power, so I hope so. After speaking, Lawrence did not hesitate and handed the divine secret medicine directly to Chu Ming. Chu Ming took the potion with a serious expression. Teacher, don't worry, we will definitely succeed this time. Lawrence nodded slightly and slowly closed his eyes. The confrontation between the divine secret medicine and the blood shackles will seriously affect the body and even cause serious injury. My child, don't force it. As he talked, the old man fell asleep because he was too tired. He carried the sleeping old man to the bed, covered him with a quilt, and went downstairs. Walking among the bookshelves, he looked at the potion in his hand and took a deep breath. Although it is not a complete potion, it is enough. The divine power contained in this is much more powerful than what was extracted from Lawrence's blood last week. And without the interference of the Black Snake bloodline, Chu Ming is getting closer and closer to success. However, the magical secret medicine is very harmful to the body, especially after accepting the darkness. The war will regard his body as a target in the process of fighting against the shackles of blood, thus causing greater damage to the body. If it weren't for the strength of the Great Knight, it would really be unbearable. With this in mind, Chu Ming put the divine secret medicine close to his body and went out for training. He wants to speed up his pace and break through to the level of a Great Knight within a few days. A few days later, Chu Ming sat cross-legged in the secret basement prepared by Dean Monroe. After these days of hard work, he has successfully broken through to the level of a Great Knight, and it is time to start dealing with the blood shackles in his body. In order to cover up the noise caused by accepting the darkness, and in order not to accidentally injure Lawrence and the others, breaking through the restrictions of the bloodline shackles here is the best choice. Feeling the gradually accelerating heartbeat, Chu Ming smiled helplessly. I didn't expect that I would also have a stressful day. Putting aside distracting thoughts, the young man slowly closed his eyes and entered a meditative state. With the last experience, he quickly entered deep meditation and saw the golden light in the endless darkness. Feeling the light cast by order, Chu Ming gained new insights. Bloodline shackles are the gods' blessing and love for their servants, and they are also the shackles that imprison humans. It imprisoned the power deep in the human bloodline, and also imprisoned the infinite possibilities of the bloodline. Although the original intention of order is to be good for mankind and help mankind resist the erosion of darkness, the shackles of blood also prevent humans from having the innate extraordinary talents like magical creatures, limiting the upper limit of humans. Now that divine power, magic and other extraordinary powers have disappeared from the world, only by breaking the restrictions of bloodline shackles can humans break through the upper limit and reach a new level. After figuring this out, Chu Ming looked at the frightening darkness surrounding order and plunged in resolutely. In the secret room, as Chu Ming made this move, his body underwent terrible changes. The skin all over his body was inflated, and his whole body was inflating like an inflated balloon. Finally, the skin reached its limit and tore open, revealing the tender muscles inside. Severe pain came from every corner of his body. Chu Ming suddenly opened his eyes. With trembling arms, he handed the mysterious medicine to his mouth and drank it in one gulp. As soon as the divine secret medicine entered his stomach, it penetrated into his body and spirit, and he had a fierce confrontation with the spreading darkness and the divine power of order. The young man opened his eyes wide, dug his hands into the floor tiles, and spit out black blood. A pain that exceeded the limit of human pain perception rose from his mind. He felt as if he had been thrown into a meat grinder, and he almost fainted from the pain. I don't know how much time passed, but almost all the nerves in his body were necrotic, and he lost the perception of pain. The power of darkness gradually faded away from him, and the power of order also weakened a lot. Chu Ming grabbed the life-saving straw like a drowning man. The next second, there was a crisp click sound, and the bloodline shackles completely failed. He felt an unprecedented freedom, and a new power emerged from the depths of his bloodline. The wounds on Chu Ming's body gradually healed, and a powerful aura rose from his body. He looked happy, opened the history book, and checked the information on it, etc. The young man's eyes shrank, he turned his palms up, and rows of black scales appeared. This is a black snake, and it has the power of war. Wild Hunt Knight Andrew. Quality: blue. Race: human race. Skills: war hunting, black snake sense, life strengthening, full level, sword mastery, intermediate level. The black snake sense was activated again, and Chu Ming couldn't stop the surprise on his face. The black snake bloodline has returned from the depths of the bloodline, and without the constraints of the bloodline shackles, it is actually at peace with the human bloodline. After thinking for a while, Chu Ming thought of a possibility. This may be because after the bloodline shackles disappeared, as a descendant of the black snake family, his hidden weak black snake bloodline revived. Because his bloodline was weak enough, only his right arm had black scales, which could be hidden or grow as he wished. Fortunately, I didn't turn into a snake man. Chu Ming breathed a sigh of relief. But if the revival of the black snake's bloodline only surprised him a little, then the gift of the remaining war power in his body gave him a huge surprise. Chu Ming turned his attention back to the history book and looked at the war hunting skill under the card. The wild hunt of war, a sign of great strength, a medal of courage. Using this skill, when facing the enemy, you can release powerful pressure to make the enemy lose its combat effectiveness. After entering the wild hunting state of war, you strengthen your will and explode with extraordinary power. Chu Ming was surprised and said, "What a powerful skill. If Snake Demon Knight only barely touches the blue quality, then Wild Hunt Knight with War Wild Hunt is already a veritable blue quality card. There is even a vague tendency to be close to dark blue." In other words, even if he does not rely on the power of the hunter's sword now, he can still suppress the Troll King Jiwen. There were people waiting outside for him to come out. Chu Ming did not immerse himself in the excitement for too long. He put on the knight uniform in the corner of the secret room, opened the iron door, and walked towards Lawrence and others who were waiting anxiously at the passage. "How about it?" Seeing Chu Ming walk out of the secret room without incident, Lawrence breathed a sigh of relief and pushed his wheelchair forward to greet him. Chu Ming smiled and said, "Success, the bloodline shackles have dissipated." "Very good." A heartfelt smile appeared on Monroe's wrinkled face. The two old men were excited and held Chu Ming's hand for a long time without letting go. It took a while before Lawrence calmed down. Breaking the blood shackles on you is only the first step. The next step is to break the blood shackles on everyone and completely eliminate the trolls. In fact, the bloodline shackles on human beings in other worlds are like network knots, which together build a network that covers all mankind. As long as one knot in the network is damaged, the entire network will collapse over time. But this time is at least measured in millennia. Facing the coming tide of darkness, mankind has no time to continue to hesitate. Only by killing the Troll King, forcefully declaring the end of the Troll era, and impacting the world's spiritual concepts with an unparalleled gesture can the trolls be quickly and completely erased from the spirit and reality. Chu Ming said solemnly, the world has not changed for a long time. If we continue to be immersed in darkness, then humanity will only be destroyed in the end. Only a massacre and a bloody storm can awaken everyone and completely break the shackles of blood. Even trolls have hope of returning to humanity after their bloodline shackles are broken. But massacre means that someone has been sacrificed, and these sacrificed people will lose their final salvation and fall before dawn. Monroe was silent for a moment and faced Chu Ming directly. Since someone needs to sacrifice, then it starts with me. Before the old man could finish speaking, Lawrence pushed him away angrily. Go away, Monroe, you are usually the most selfish, why are you pretending to be great? Chu Ming shook his head firmly. Roden Kingdom needs you, and Niho College needs you too. And I only kill the guilty. After saying that, regardless of the old man's reaction, the young man left his back and walked towards the palace of the royal capital. On the Royal Capital Avenue, Chu Ming walked to Luotan Square in front of the Royal Capital Palace and stopped. There are many pedestrians in the square, gorgeous carriages pass through it, and countless people stay here, making it a prosperous scene. The young man closed his eyes and sensed the dark atmosphere that was about to overflow from the square. He drew his sword and shouted in the direction of the palace, Gavin Spears, get out of here. The sound spread throughout the capital with powerful pressure. The expressions on the faces of passers-by froze, and an inexplicable fear rose from their hearts. For a moment, they were unable to move their legs. Roar! Some city guard knights who were less affected by the coercion turned into crazy forms, with blood-red eyes, and rushed towards Chu Ming crazily. Roll! Chu Ming had a cold face and unleashed powerful pressure. The knights vomited blood and fainted to the ground before they even got close. He raised his head and shouted again, Gavin Spears, get out. It seemed that the shouting had an effect. After a while, Jiwen's tall figure gradually appeared from the palace. Before taking a few steps, Jiwen seemed to sense something and suddenly stopped. Great Knight, no, more powerful power. Jiwen felt the powerful aura on Chu Ming's body, and his expression changed instantly. Who are you? Andrew, your killer. Chu Ming replied, stared at the man closely, raised his hand and shook it, releasing all his powerful pressure. With him as the center, the surrounding floor tiles could not withstand the pressure and cracked and were crushed into powder. Jiwen's expression changed drastically and he quickly took a few steps back, but was unable to escape from the coercive range. I saw veins popping out on his face, his eyes bloodshot, and the muscles all over his body swelling and turning into a troll. But even the powerful Troll King couldn't withstand this powerful pressure. His knees bent and he almost couldn't bear it anymore and was about to kneel down. Your Highness Jiwen. When several dukes and nobles who had just arrived saw this scene, they stopped and looked shocked on their faces. Let me go. A look of despair appeared on Jiwen's face. This was simply not a force he could resist. The guy in front of him was even more monster than him. He just wants to stay away from here, away from this boy. Chu Ming shook his head gently, walked up to Jiwen and held down his head. Sorry, no one can survive today, except you. Why not? The huge body of Troll King Jiwen was pressed almost close to the ground by the pressure, losing its previous majesty. Chu Ming shook his head, grabbed the head of the Troll King Jiwen, and threw him directly into the center of the square. With a loud bang, Jiwen smashed the fountain pool and lay on the ground in embarrassment, unable to move. Looking away from Jiwen, Chu Ming turned to the frightened noble and said coldly, help me find all the painters in the city. If one of you is missing, you will all die. Yes, yes. The nobleman knelt down and worshipped a few times in fear, then stumbled away from the square. Help me. Jarvan reached out to the nobles for help, but no one looked back. Chu Ming's coercion spread throughout the royal capital, and the dukes and nobles had no intention of escaping. They honestly gathered the painters in the family together, formed a long queue and escorted them to the square. Sir, we have fulfilled your orders. Armin, who had despised Chu Ming at the noble banquet last week, showed a flattering look and knelt on the ground. Well done. Chu Ming raised the corners of his mouth, grabbed the collar of the man's clothes, and lifted him up. Sir, why? Armin struggled desperately, kicking his legs wildly, with a look of fear on his face. To thank you, I decided to start with you first. No, do not want. Ignoring the man's words, Chu Ming turned his attention to the dozens of painters who were hunched over in fear in front of him. These are servants specially trained by noble families. Their greatest skill is to praise greatness and use brushes and paints to paint the master's great achievements. Now these people will record this massacre, erase the false glory of the past, paint the ugly posture of the troll struggling and fearing, and use unprecedented bloody pictures to impact and shake the spiritual foundation of the troll's existence. May I have your name? Chu Ming asked the white-haired old painter ahead. When the old painter saw the young man asking him, his knees weakened on the spot and he replied uneasily. Sir, Wan is my name. Very good, these painters are in your hands. Chu Ming glanced at all the painters present with majestic eyes. Pick up your paintbrush and paint what happens next to your heart's content. When the painters heard this, they looked at each other, before they could figure out what Chu Ming was going to do. The young man threw Armin to the ground and stepped on him. Puff! The huge force was transmitted to Armin's whole body, and his cervical vertebrae could not bear the force and broke on the spot. The man was vomiting blood, couldn't even speak, and his breath gradually became weak. Then, under the shocked gazes of all the painters, Chu Ming moved his wrist, swung his sword, and with a sizzling sound, Armin's head flew out. Ah! Seeing such a bloody scene, several painters turned pale and knelt down to vomit. Some people even couldn't bear such a bloody scene and fainted on the spot. Wan, slap them awake. Yes, sir. The old painter's face tightened, fearing that Chu Ming would kill him if he disagreed, so he quickly called on several painters to slap the unconscious painter awake. Draw well for me, or he will be your fate. Chu Ming left a faint sentence and walked towards Jiwen. You can't kill me. Jiwen panicked, resisting the heavy pressure, and forced himself to stand up and retreat. Gavin Spears, haven't you always wanted to save the world and save humanity? Hearing Chu Ming's words, the man was stunned for a moment. Only when you die can this world be saved. Bullshit. Jiwen suddenly became angry. It's all bullshit. I can't die. The man's eyes became more and more bloody, and a violent aura rose from his body. He used his hands and feet together, and rushed to Chu Ming like a wild beast, stretching out his sharp claws. Sucker punch. Chu Ming shook his head slightly, and the black snake sense activated, and his right hand grabbed the man's thick neck with the force of thunder. Veins popped out on his forehead and he pushed the Troll King to the ground. Bang! The ground cracked, stone brick fragments and soil flew out, and a powerful impact exploded. The man's eyes protruded, as if he was about to be squeezed out. Immediately afterwards, Chu Ming stepped on the man and raised the hunter's sword with both hands. Gavin Spears. The boy's majestic voice spread throughout the royal capital along with the shocking pressure. When countless people heard this, they stopped at the same time, their eyes shook, and they looked in all directions of the square. The strongest troll king of this era. In Dark Age 8414, he was executed in Roden Square by the human knight Andrew. From today on, the era of trolls ends with this sword in my hand. As he finished speaking, the hunter's sword in Chu Ming's hand became even hotter. Ignoring Jiwen's call, he looked seriously and swung the sword down. Sizzle! The Troll King's head flew high and landed in front of a city guard knight. A large amount of black blood spurted out from the broken neck of Jiwen's body, raining blood on the faces of everyone in the square. Dots of blood dyed the people black and red. They were shocked by this horrific scene. They stared blankly at the fallen body of the Troll King, opened their mouths, and showed confusion in their eyes. Suddenly, waves of black mist rose from the city guard knights who turned into ugly monsters. They looked ferocious, howled in pain several times, and their bodies gradually became smaller and turned back into humans. Then there were ethereal clicks, like glass breaking, that resounded through the soul. People looked at their bodies in bewilderment, feeling a sense of pleasure from within, as if they had gained some kind of freedom. Seeing this scene, Chu Ming knew that stimulating the spirit to speed up the blood shackles was the right way. But this is far from enough and far from being called a success. Chu Ming slowly approached a noble who had not yet transformed into a human being, grabbed his ankle, and dragged him to the square. Facing the shouts of this troll noble, the young man remained indifferent. Why are you dazed? Keep painting. After Chu Ming woke up the sluggish painters, he turned around, threw the troll noble out, and chopped off his head with a sword. This was not to vent his anger, nor to satisfy his desire to kill. This massacre will be recorded in the form of an oil painting, and then spread throughout the world, announcing to the world the end of the troll era, thus prompting more people to break free from the shackles of blood. The massacre lasted from early morning to dusk, and Chu Ming could not count how many trolls he had executed. When he put down the long sword that was covered in blood, the entire square was already blood-red, and every inch of the land here was soaked with blood. The corpses of the trolls piled up into a hill, and the fishy smell emanated, making people look pale. The painters knelt on the ground, letting the blood dye the white dresses into blood red. The brushes in their hands kept painting the bloody scenes with their hands. Chu Ming sat exhausted in front of the hill of troll corpses. He slowly exhaled and looked up at the warm yellow sunset. As the sun sets, the era of trolls comes to an end. Chu Ming's eyes began to become blurry, and the noisy crying in the blood-red ground gradually moved away from him. When he was about to exit the writing state, he suddenly saw the golden light surging in the history book beside him, as if a new card was being born. This is a domain card. Chu Ming's mind was shaken, and the next second his consciousness was surrounded by silence, and he exited the writing state. Perception gradually returned. The faint light, the sound of cars running downstairs and a faint musty smell touched his senses one after another, and his consciousness returned to his body. What was that last one? Chu Ming shook his head and summoned the history book to open it. He glanced around and found a card under the Andrew card on the card page of the book. Troll Slaughterhouse. Quality: Blue. Skill: Troll Killer. On the card, Andrew is sitting in front of a mountain of corpses and a sea of blood, with troll corpses behind him. His expression is cold, and a coldness seems to spread through the card. Troll Slayer can intimidate enemies more than twice their size, reduce their combat power, and cause additional damage. It's actually a domain card. I'm really making a lot of money now. Chu Ming looked surprised and could not suppress the smile on his face. Compared with weapons, character cards, etc., domain cards are more precious and rare, and more difficult to obtain. Only famous scenes that can be remembered in history for a long time and leave an imprint on people's hearts have the opportunity to evolve into domain cards. The reason why Troll Slaughterhouse was born is because the troll massacre carried out by Chu Ming in the royal capital was so shocking that it left a shadow mark in the hearts of the world and met the conditions for the birth of a domain card. The reason why domain cards are more valuable and rarer than other cards is due to their own characteristics. It is different from ordinary weapon cards and character cards. It can reverse reality, change the actual rules of a certain region, and affect a group. That's right, not an individual, but a whole group. In other words, when other card knights enter the field of Troll Slaughterhouse, they can also get the bonus of Troll Slayer, thereby increasing the damage to trolls. This is the abnormality of domain cards. Taking out the Troll Slaughterhouse from the history of time, Chu Ming caressed it for a while before returning his attention to the history of time. Dark Age 8414, Wild Hunt Knight Andrew broke through the restrictions of bloodline shackles and launched a bloody massacre in Roden Square. In Dark Age 8424, the bloody oil painting spread throughout the countries, the shackles of blood completely disappeared, and the Age of Trolls came to an end. Dark Age 15005, darkness flooded the world and Intinuit died. Hiss, I didn't expect that after the bloodline shackles were broken, the history of the other world would actually continue 7,000 years later. This long historical span really surprised Chu Ming. You must know that before humans interfered with the history of other worlds and before trolls appeared in history, the other world only persisted for 3,000 years before being submerged by darkness. I didn't expect that just breaking the shackles of blood this time would have such a profound impact on human civilization. With doubts, Chu Ming carefully studied the history that he had deduced alone in the other world after exiting the writing state. In Dark Age 8424, the trolls completely disappeared, and a new era ushered in within humankind. Humanity called the level after the Grand Knight, the blue quality level, the Legendary Knight. Later, Chu Ming, as the only legendary knight in this world and the executioner of the Royal Capital Massacre, returned to Niho College to take over the position of dean amid the praise and criticism of the world. More than 60 years later, when mankind ushered in the tide of darkness and fell into despair, 7 legendary knights who came out of Niho Academy turned the tide, helped the building to collapse, and led the countries to defeat the tide of darkness. Since then, there has been a wave of pilgrimage in other worlds, and all countries have sent knights to Niho Academy to study and practice. As a result, Niho College became a true holy land of knights. In the subsequent historical evolution, the word, Niho, gradually took on a new meaning, knight. In the year 8496 of the Dark Age, in the Dean's Room of Niho College, the old Andrew passed away forever. For the future of the college, and to commemorate the achievements of the legendary knight Andrew, the Niho College site was officially moved to the Snowy Ridge in the Land of Death, where they built a huge stone statue for Andrew. In the following thousands of years, this stone statue was like a beacon guiding knights on their pilgrimage. Seeing this, Chu Ming suddenly realized. In the original history, although there was no troll interference within human beings, the bloodline shackles were not broken, limiting human strength to dark green quality. As the saying goes, if there is no destruction, no establishment, if the trolls do not appear, then the secret of the bloodline shackles may be buried forever with the demise of the world. After Chu Ming broke the shackles of blood and solved the troll disaster, human strength could reach new heights by relying on the power of blood, so it could persist until it was engulfed by darkness for 7,000 years. Is this dark tide so perverted? Even the blue-quality legendary knight can't end it. Chu Ming frowned, picked up the history book and was about to continue reading. Suddenly an accident happened, and without Chu Ming's control, the history book turned over automatically without wind. How is this going? Chu Ming's face was shocked, and suddenly he was affected by a mysterious force in his heart. He suddenly raised his head and looked out the window. Above the sky, ancient trees stood between the sky and the earth. The transparent fluorescent tree branches suddenly emitted shining golden light, illuminating the entire night sky. People who were busy working in the building stopped what they were doing and looked out the window blankly. On the roadway, the traffic lights flashed green, cars stopped one after another, and people stretched out their heads and stared up at the sky. Happened. The end of the world is coming. This was the first time for people to see such a change in the ancient tree, and they felt endless confusion in their hearts. In the hut, Chu Ming stared at the ancient trees emitting golden light. No way. He looked down at the history book in a strange way. Golden light surged on the book, and in the next second, pages of history were torn out from the history book, and golden light floated towards the ancient tree. No wonder the history book was missing pages when I first got it. It turned out to be you. Chu Ming complained, and could only watch as the pages of the book floated towards the ancient tree and merged into the branches shining with golden light. A few minutes later, when the golden light on the history book dissipated, only one page remained inside. Dark Age 15,005, darkness flooded the world and Intinuit died. Well, Chu Ming sighed, at least leave some for me. While he was still immersed in sadness, the ancient tree had undergone new changes. When the pages of the book blend into the ancient branches, the golden light shining on them seems to have reached its extreme. A loud bang was heard throughout the sky, and in people's shocked eyes, countless golden lights fell from the ancient trees. These are all cards, isn't it? The golden light fell into the city and turned into cards to find their card masters. 10 minutes later, an emergency meeting was held in a conference room on the top floor of the Alliance building. An hour later, the Liming City Card Master Alliance issued a city-wide announcement, announcing that the future of the other world had changed and a new history was born. The whole city was shaken, and people began to look for the card master who had successfully advanced the history of the other world. The initiator of all this, an 18-year-old high school student, was sleeping soundly in bed because he was too tired. At 2:35 noon, Chu Ming woke up leisurely. Looks like I overslept. After staying in bed for a while, he got up and opened the history book. After experiencing the ancient tree mutation event last night, there is only one page left in the book. Even if the pages of the book were swallowed up by the ancient tree, what made Chu Ming most depressed was that the pages of the book were gone before he could see the history behind it. In this way, if he wants to understand the history behind the other world, he must wait for the card masters to sort out the historical information of the other world. It's over, now I've really become a worker. Chu Ming complained silently and put down the history book. In fact, the disappearance of these historical pages will not affect him at all. At most, it will make him less free to rewrite history. Compared with this, the history books have brought him far more help than he has lost. What's more, the growth of the ancient tree of time is also conducive to the development of the card master system in the real world, allowing him to obtain better cards. In this, the alien world gets a new future, Blue Star gets new power, he gets powerful cards, and everyone has a bright future. If I had to choose a great villain, it would have to be the creature of darkness. Win. You win. Chu Ming grinned and then flipped through yesterday's news. As he expected, last night there was another abnormality in the ancient tree of time, and a large number of new cards were born. With so many major events happening, the online forum had already been in turmoil. Even the official media of the Card Master Alliance reported this incident and called on card masters who promote the history of other worlds to contact the Card Master Alliance. Seeing this, the corners of Chu Ming's mouth rose. I am Jai's card master, so who knows who Andrew's card master is? Contact is impossible, please take your time and guess. Not to mention how many dark creatures are hidden in the already riddled Dawn City that hate him so much that they gnash their teeth with hatred. Even human beings are not monolithic. If he rashly reveals his identity, maybe the first thing he will receive is not flowers and applause, but a silent death. Of course, another more important reason is that he does not want to expose the secrets of the history books. The ability of Time History book is so shocking that as long as it is exposed, it will definitely arouse the covetousness of countless card masters. He would be too stupid to expose the history books for the so-called glory, reputation and resources that are dispensable to him. Chu Ming browsed the online forum for a long time and waited until it was almost dinner time before turning off the computer. After the future of the other world changed, countless new cards were born, some of which he was familiar with, and some of which he did not recognize. After some card masters got lucky and got cards unexpectedly, they couldn't help but immediately went to the forum to show off. Chu Ming also took this opportunity to learn about many cards from after the Troll era, as well as the background information of their era. To his regret, the highest quality of these cards was only green, and his known history was limited. But this is just the beginning. As long as humans can resonate new cards through resonance rituals and summarize historical data, the historical context after the Troll era will soon be sorted out clearly. Historical data still needs to be compiled by the Card Master Alliance, and the writing of history has to come to an end for the time being. Let's continue after we prepare new cards. The most important thing now is to solve the real trolls hidden in human society and stop the conspiracy of these dark creatures. After dinner, Chu Ming opened the history book and took stock of his gains before taking action. The first thing to take stock of is the biggest gain from this history writing, 2 blue quality cards, namely Wild Hunt Knight Andrew and Troll Slaughterhouse. Both are born from fighting trolls and are every troll's nightmare. In addition, Chu Ming also received 3 dark green cards. 2 of them are secret techniques, namely Griffin's secret technique incomplete and Violent Bear's secret technique. In his original idea, he sold the Griffin secret technique and left the Violent Bear secret technique that was more suitable for his own use. But after the future of the alien world changed, Andrew became a famous historical figure. As Andrew's mentor, Lawrence will definitely be focused on by the Card Master Alliance. At that time, a Griffin secret card suddenly leaked out of the black market, which would definitely attract the attention of the authorities. If the Card Master Alliance really wants to conduct a thorough investigation, then his identity as a traitor of the Griffin secret technique must not be hidden. Therefore, in order to avoid unnecessary trouble, Chu Ming decided to keep the Griffin secret technique and sell the Violent Bear secret technique. After thinking for a while, Chu Ming looked at the last dark green card, Hunter's Sword. The Hunter's Sword can give knights long-lasting combat capabilities and super explosive power, but the disadvantage is that it requires accumulation of killings. Only beings like the Wild Hunt Knight who can fight with high intensity can exert its full power, and with the Wild Hunt Knight, it can exert its full power. The huntsman is completely bound. If Chu Ming's weak body is used for self-defense, it will not be able to exert the full effect of the Hunter's Sword. So what he used to defend himself was the gray card Black Snake Long Sword that had been eliminated. As for Universal Knight's secret technique and other miscellaneous cards that were of little use to him, he was prepared to trade them on the black market. However, The real dangers of trolls have not yet been eliminated, and black market transactions will have to be put on hold for a while. After counting all the gains, Chu Ming flicked his wrist, the cards flew out, and Zhe-Hai appeared in the room in a flash of golden light. Zhe-Hai was summoned from reality for the first time. He was confused for a moment, and then a wave of memories poured into his mind from his connection with the ancient tree. His eyes gradually became clearer. He looked at Chu Ming, and asked carefully, "Are you my card master?" Chu Ming patted the man's shoulder armor, which made a banging sound. "Zhe-Hai, it's me." Zhe-Hai's eyes were blank. After a few seconds, he seemed to think of something and suddenly became excited. "Master Andrew, it's me." Chu Ming nodded slightly and smiled. But, Master, why did you become a card master?" Zhe-Hai scratched his head, his already unintelligent head becoming even more confused. Chu Ming didn't say anything. He threw a card to the ground. Amid the surge of golden light, a young knight appeared in the room. Andrew said, "Anyway, things are very complicated. It's difficult for me to explain to you with your IQ. But you just need to know that both Chu Ming and Andrew are the same person." "Master is right." Zhe-Hai nodded vigorously and agreed very much. "Good." Andrew patted Zhe-Hai on the shoulder and praised him. Although Zhe-Hai has many shortcomings, such as being stupid and afraid of death, but he is loyal and self-sufficient enough. When faced with problems, he will only choose to believe Chu Ming unconditionally. This alone is enough. After chatting with Zhe-Hai for a few words, Andrew turned and looked at Chu Ming. The main body was seen with its eyes closed tightly, as if standing unconsciously. This is because Chu Ming's consciousness has taken over the human machine Andrew, and the spirit descends on Andrew. The so-called trance is actually an ability that when the compatibility between the card master and a certain card reaches a high level, the card master can take over the body of the card with his consciousness and carry out activities. Originally, the compatibility between Chu Ming and Andrew was not very high, but they could barely reach resonance. At that time, there was no need for trance. But when Chu Ming succeeded Andrew, experienced adventures in other worlds, and changed the future, Andrew's original imprint was completely erased in history, leaving only Chu Ming's imprint. The card Andrew recorded in history is actually Chu Ming himself. If you are in harmony with yourself, then the degree of compatibility will be full at once. How can it not be high? It is also for this reason that there will be no discomfort after Chu Ming descends on Andrew. However, the ability of divine seduction is rarely used by card masters in reality, because although divine seduction may sound very bluffing, it is really useless to ordinary card masters. No matter what, cards that can be summoned from another world either have special abilities or powerful skills. For these modern card masters, these abilities and skills are very unfamiliar. If a card master does not have special training, the strength of the card will seriously deteriorate when the card master casts the card. Even a genius card master can only barely display the basic strength of the card after a long period of training, let alone perform at a super level. Therefore, trances can generally only be used in shady scenarios such as concealing identities, stealing intelligence, and assassinations. For ordinary card masters, let alone training in trance, whether they can use it or not is a question. After all, in order for the trance to work, it must first have a high degree of compatibility with the card, and it also requires a lot of time to train before it can be used. If you have this spare time, wouldn't it be nice to directly control the cards to fight? Why do you have to do such a thankless task as seance? Card masters like Chu Ming who can perfectly display the strength of their cards are rare, if not the only ones in this world. As for why Chu Ming specifically focused his consciousness on Andrew today, he naturally had something to do. He plans to go out to investigate the specific situation of Dawn City being infiltrated by dark creatures so that he can make next plans. His consciousness temporarily returned to his original form, and Chu Ming threw Wild Hunt Knight Andrew and several other cards downstairs. On the road, a truck passed by and the card fell on the warehouse. After everything was ready, he handed the black snake sword to Zhe-Hai's hand. "Zhe-Hai, take care of my body and don't let anyone get close to me." "Yes." Zhe-Hai looked serious, straightened his back, and took the black snake sword with both hands. "There will be a lot of commotion in the city next, so don't worry about it and wait for me to come back." After saying that, Chu Ming fell on the bed limply and lost consciousness. After Chu Ming's consciousness seduced the Andrew card, Zhehai arranged Chu Ming's body and covered him with a quilt. Don't worry, young master, I will never allow anyone to get close to your body. Zhehai talked to himself and his expression became serious. He held the black snake sword tightly and walked around the house vigilantly. On the road, a truck passed by. Suddenly the golden light above flashed, and a young and resolute knight appeared above with a red sword in his hand. Who's going to step on the roof of my car? As Chu Ming appeared, a dull sound sounded. The truck driver stopped the truck, cursed, stuck his head out, and looked back. Feel sorry. Chu Ming apologized, jumped out of the truck, and disappeared into the alley. The truck driver opened his mouth wide and stared in the direction where Chu Ming disappeared. Cold sweat broke out behind him. I almost got into trouble just now. The driver became more and more frightened as he thought about it, and immediately drove the truck far away from the place. In the alley, Chu Ming followed his instinct and walked deeper into the damp and dark alley. If you want to investigate the infiltration of Dawn City, you must first capture a troll for questioning. In his blood perception, the deeper he went into the alley, the darker the atmosphere became, constantly stimulating his nerves. Walking in the alley, the sound of metal chains shaking on his armor rhythmically followed his footsteps. Suddenly, he stopped in front of an old apartment building. It's such a strong dark aura, I'm just having a meeting with this carrot. Chu Ming narrowed his eyes, stepped lightly on the ground, and jumped 6 meters high, grabbing the heavily rusted iron fence on the second floor. He kept moving and kept jumping up. He only heard the thumping sound echoing in the alley. After a while, Chu Ming jumped to the 8th floor of the old apartment building. Strange noises continued to echo, and the iron fence shook violently, which immediately attracted the attention of the owner of the 8th floor residence. After a while, a greasy middle-aged man in colorful clothes and a big gold chain approached the balcony and looked out carefully. After looking around for a while, the man found nothing and scratched his head with sparse hair in confusion. Strange, are you looking for me? A sound suddenly appeared on the balcony. The greasy uncle's body was shaken, a fierce look appeared on his face, his muscles tensed up, and he waved his fist towards the source of the sound. The next second, there was only a loud bang, and the entire rusty iron fence was forcibly broken open by Chu Ming. The man was hit by a fist, and his body smashed through the balcony glass door and hit the living room wall. His eyes were wide open and he could not rest in peace. Who is it? The remaining trolls quickly woke up and looked toward the balcony. On the balcony of this modern apartment building, a young knight wearing retro armor and cold eyes appeared in front of them. He's actually a human knight. How did he find us? No matter what, humans will die. A dozen trolls in the room screamed in surprise, their faces became ferocious, and they opened their teeth and claws to attack Chu Ming. Etc. One of the trolls' eyes were as big as copper bells, as if he had discovered something terrible. He looked frightened and stretched out his hand to call his accomplices back. Brush. The hunter's sword was unsheathed, and several red lights lit up. The ferocious expression on the troll's face froze, his movements suddenly stopped, and his body broke into several pieces and fell down. Black blood flowed from the remains of the body, and the floor was instantly dyed black and red. The only remaining troll had a face full of fear, fell to the ground, and backed away in fear. You are Wild Hunt Knight Andrew. Why? You appeared here too. Oh, you actually know me. Chu Ming's eyes were surprised, and a hint of gloom flashed in his heart. This troll knows him, which means that after he rewrote the future of the other world, the trolls in this changed world line also appeared in reality. And with the support of other troll associates, he soon entered the human city. You must know that it has only been a day since he rewrote the history of another world. This troll was able to blend into human society so quickly. Without the support of the huge troll force, it would have been impossible. By the way, what were you talking about just now? Can you tell me? Chu Ming knelt down and patted the man's shoulder kindly. If I'm in a good mood, I might let you go. The troll's body trembled, his Adam's apple rolled, and he quickly knelt on the ground. Master Andrew, don't kill me. I'll say anything. These guys said they were planning something. Action. Chu Ming narrowed his eyes and grabbed the man's collar. What action, and who is behind it? I don't know. The troll collapsed and cried, shaking his head desperately, I just came here and I don't know anything. Is that so? Thank you for your hard work. With a calm expression on his face, Chu Ming broke the troll's neck and stood up. I didn't expect that these guys would cause trouble just after the history of the other world changed. It seems that they also know that as long as the Card Master Alliance compiles the relevant history of the troll era from the mouths of humans from other worlds, they will be able to discover the secrets of the trolls, so they plan to give it a try. Chu Ming stood there and thought for a while. Suddenly, the alarm sounded from far to near, interrupting his thoughts. He looked at the bloodstains and corpses scattered on the ground and shook his head. Now is not the time to contact the Card Master Alliance. It is time to leave and find the next target. Walking to the balcony, Chu Ming glanced at the red and blue flashing police lights outside the window, then he jumped lightly onto the rooftop of the apartment building opposite and left the place. A few minutes later, when the Card Master arrived at the scene and opened the door, a smell of blood wafted out. Seeing such a bloody scene, everyone couldn't help but turn pale. As night falls, the neon lights of the city light up. On a dark rooftop, Chu Ming looked up toward the city center. I saw many high-rise buildings in the distance, and the Card Master Alliance building was erected in the middle of the city. Between the buildings, huge wall advertisements scrolled in circles, and the city light show was held as usual. Everything was as usual, full of order and peace. But he knew that beneath this prosperity, there was an undercurrent flowing turbulently. Chu Ming stood with his eyes closed, the cold wind making his skirt rustle. I don't know how much time passed, but suddenly an explosion sounded from a distance, and the young man suddenly opened his eyes. In the distance, downtown, a building lit up with the sparks of an explosion. Has the so-called action come? Grasping the hunter's sword at his waist, Chu Ming turned over and jumped, shuttled between the high-rise buildings of the city, and gradually approached the explosion site. Downstairs of the Yingguang building, the tempered glass on the wall exploded and fell into pieces, and the car alarm wailed. Not long after the accident happened, the fire brigade and security guards rushed to the scene. Before everyone could start the rescue operation, suddenly, a roar came from upstairs, a figure flew out of the fire, fell from the sky, and immediately smashed the police car parked below to pieces. As if a shark had smelled blood, reporters from all media outlets crowded in. When they saw the miserable appearance of the deceased and the countless bite marks on his body, they all took a breath. Excuse me, is this a sudden attack by dark creatures? The cameras clicked, and the reporters raised their guns and cannons and surrounded the security guard. The Card Master had a serious expression, answered a few vague words, and then directed the card to move the reporters away and set up a cordon. Suddenly, a scream rang out from the crowd. A card character was attacked and turned into light and returned to the Card Master's hands. Attack. Be on guard. I saw the reporters in the crowd who had just been trying to get closer to the scene transformed into trolls, rushed into the crowd and started killing them wantonly. The Card Masters were sweating coldly, and quickly organized their forces to attack the trolls. Blood spattered and panic brewed from the crowd. People began to panic, rush into the cordon, and flee behind the security guards. The situation was urgent, so the Card Master did not dwell on this detail and focused on the troll wreaking havoc among the crowd. Under the concentrated fire of wave after wave of skill cards, several trolls were quickly eliminated. But before the Card Masters could breathe a sigh of relief, a dozen passers-by suddenly jumped up and turned into ugly monsters and attacked the Card Masters with their sharp claws. The fishy wind passed by, and the ferocious face of the troll was getting closer and closer. The weak Card Master had no resistance at all. He could only watch in despair as the troll's claws approached and were about to penetrate his heart. Stop. Suddenly, a majestic voice came from afar. Under the incredulous gaze of the Card Master, the trolls showed pain on their faces, their bodies froze, and they really stopped moving. Who is it? The troll roared, trying to break free from the shackles of the pressure. Bang! Another heavy pressure came, and the troll's leg bones broke, and he screamed and fell to his knees on the ground. Seeing this scene, the Card Masters looked at each other and looked in the direction of the sound. Among the fleeing crowd, a young knight with a relaxed face was seen walking against the current. Wild Hunt Knight Andrew. After seeing Chu Ming's true face clearly, some of the trolls present let out frightened exclamations. Andrew. The eyes of several injured student-looking card characters lit up and they got up from the ground. It's Dean Andrew. These card characters all come from the time when the trolls disappeared and Chu-Ming became Dean Niho, and he is very familiar with him as the Dean. Dean Andrew. The heads of several card masters were spinning, with expressions of surprise on their faces. Isn't this man the great hero who ended the era of trolls that the newly born cards in their hands have been talking about? Although he could not recognize his students, Chu-Ming still nodded slightly to everyone, and then looked at the struggling trolls on the field. What are your actions tonight? A flash of fear flashed in the eyes of the trolls, but they still gritted their teeth and remained silent. I admire your courage. Chu-Ming's tone was cold and he held his right hand empty. Boom. The pressure suddenly increased to another level. The concrete cracked under the trolls' feet. They roared in pain and turned into blood mist before they could hold on for a second. Gulu. The card masters swallowed hard and stared at Chu-Ming's back with surprised eyes. Senior Andrew, thank you. Before the card master could finish his words of thanks, Chu-Ming raised his hand to stop him. No need to say more words of thanks, business is more important. Can you contact the Cardmaster Security Bureau now? I want to know how the situation is in other places. All the security card masters looked at each other, did not dare to neglect, and immediately called back to the bureau. After a while, a security card technician finally answered the call while the phone was busy. But after just hearing a few words, the guard card master started sweating profusely and his face turned pale. Something bad has happened. It's not just us here in Dawn City, there have been attacks by dark creatures in other places. Now the hotline of the Security Bureau has been overwhelmed, and the guards can't handle it at all. Chu-Ming frowned and asked, what about the card masters other than those from the Security Bureau? Can't they be transferred? The guard card master wiped his sweat and shook his head desperately. Not only was Liming City under attack, but a wave of darkness also happened to erupt outside the giant wall. A large number of dark creatures are attacking the giant wall, and other card masters cannot support it at all. Hearing this, Chu-Ming's eyes narrowed. Trolls are indeed dark creatures transformed from humans, and their cunning is as cunning as anyone else. The purpose of these trolls attacking Dawn City is nothing more than to capture Dawn City and massacre human beings. The tide of darkness outside the giant wall alone cannot do this. At most, it can only delay the combat power of Dawn City's high-end card masters on the giant wall. But if the trolls take advantage of the emptiness inside Dawn City to attack the urban area, and attack the card masters on the high wall from both inside and outside, they can disrupt the human position and completely capture Dawn City. To achieve this, the strength of ordinary trolls is definitely not enough, unless the King of Trolls comes in person. Thinking of this, Chu-Ming suddenly turned his attention to the towering Alliance building in the distance. The Alliance building is the core of Dawn City. Only if it is captured can the city fall quickly. So the target of the trolls must be there, and maybe the Troll King is also there. If you want to completely resolve this crisis, then only killing the king again can bring enough spiritual impact to break the bloodline shackles of the reality troll. The Troll King, wait for me to come. Chu-Ming took a deep breath, pulled out the hunter's sword, and turned to look at everyone. You guys come with me. And the reporter, come here too. A beautiful reporter at the scene who had not yet escaped pointed to herself in confusion. That's right, your equipment is fine, help me start a live broadcast. I want to make sure every screen in the city has this live video. You can negotiate among yourselves. If you want to save Dawn City, act quickly. Okay. The beautiful reporter's eyes were confused. Although she didn't know what Chu-Ming was going to do, she still obediently directed the photographer next to her to turn on the live broadcast equipment. Then she looked nervous and started discussing with the receptionist using her headset. After the communication was complete, Chu-Ming waved to the card masters behind him and walked towards the Alliance building. Seeing Chu-Ming start to take action, several card student knights followed directly, regardless of the hesitant card master behind them. With all his cards gone, there was no reason to stand still, so the card masters gritted their teeth and followed. Boom. Another car exploded, and the pungent smell of gasoline filled the air. Sizzle. The electronic screen on the building flickered and turned into a live broadcast. In the live broadcast footage, Chu-Ming led a group of card characters and card masters to cross obstacles and walk to the parking lot of the Alliance building. At this time, the entire Union building's power system was destroyed and plunged into darkness. There seemed to be some danger hidden inside. This live broadcast was shown on all the screens in the streets and was seen not only by humans but also by some trolls. Many trolls saw Chu Ming and his group approaching the Alliance building on the screen. They roared a few times, stopped their attacks, and ran towards the city center. Then, what is that? The few people who survived waited until the troll was far away before they dared to raise their heads and looked at the live broadcast above. Nonsense, just nonsense. In the TV station, a host smashed the table, seemingly dissatisfied with the decision to broadcast live. If you don't run away at this time, are you going to wait here to die? Just to listen to what that stupid card says. The host's chest rose and fell violently, and a trace of fear flashed in his eyes as he looked at the troll appearing in the live broadcast. Yang Zan, please be patient. Another middle-aged man sitting in the broadcast room comforted him. Anyway, the whole city is in danger now. We can't go anywhere, can we? Yang Zan said angrily. But this is too stupid. When the man saw that the director was missing in the room, he quietly took out a cigarette from his trouser pocket, lit it, and took a puff. Just let them go. The live broadcast will satisfy them. There is no other choice anyway. Yang Zan's face turned pale and he stopped talking. Although the man was right, they couldn't escape anywhere, but he would rather believe that the card masters of the giant wall would come back for help than believe in what they could do. The two had different attitudes and became silent. During a period of silence, the live broadcast screen changed. Countless trolls suddenly entered the screen and rushed toward everyone. In front of the Alliance building, hundreds of trolls were attracted by the live broadcast and surrounded Chu Ming and his party. It's over. Some ordinary people who were hiding in the dark and quietly watching the live broadcast couldn't help shouting when they saw this scene. So many dark creatures. In the live broadcast, there were so many trolls that they filled all the streets of the Alliance building. It looked like all the trolls in the city had gathered here. Chu Ming and his party were surrounded in the parking lot, looking very small in the wave-like group of trolls. People watching the live broadcast felt a sense of suffocation, and their eyes gradually became desperate. I just said, this is not rescue, this is death. Yang Zan gritted his teeth and vented his dissatisfaction. Live broadcast, live broadcast. Is it to let the whole city see their death? Yang Zan. The middle-aged man frowned and drank softly. Stop talking nonsense. Do you want to lose your job? Yang Zan sneered and turned to the man. Work, haha, I'm going to die later, and I'm still worried about this crappy job. If you want to stay, just stay here by yourself. I don't want to serve you anymore. After saying that, Yang Zan slammed the door and left the broadcast room. Oh, why bother? The middle-aged man sighed and turned his attention to the screen again. In front of the Alliance building, countless trolls stared at Chu Ming and his party with devouring eyes, unable to hold back their restlessness and wanting to devour them all. Hey, isn't this Master Andrew? Suddenly, a sound of gnashing teeth came from the group of monsters, and Pastor Lyle came out and stared at him resentfully. Lyle, long time no see. Chu Ming raised the corner of his mouth and gave him a middle finger. Roar. When the trolls saw Chu Ming's provocation, they roared angrily. Andrew, your bad character has not changed, you are a scum without any aristocratic etiquette. Do you think this is still Black Snake Town? Lyle looked ferocious and was the first to pounce on Chu Ming. Seeing this, the other trolls also rushed forward. The dark creatures came like a wave, and the student knights struggled to stand in front of everyone. However, because the number of trolls was too large, they soon could not hold on and allowed the trolls to break through the defense line. Everyone's faces turned pale, like a drowning man trying to grab the last straw, and they looked at the knight behind them. Just in time, Chu Ming chuckled and threw a card casually. I hope everyone will support it and subscribe more.